Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to this Wearable Technology Special Interest Group event. My name is Pim van Baarsen. I'm CEO for the Silverstone Technology Cluster. For those who don't know, the Silverstone Technology Cluster is a not-for-profit membership organization looking after advanced engineering, electronics, and software companies in the wider Silverstone area, roughly anywhere within an hour's driving time. As you can see behind me, the three main strands to our work are promotion, support, and thought leadership. So promotion, we're very much here to help you promote your business as well as the cluster as a whole. But bringing people together and encourage them to collaborate is very much what we're about and what we do. In terms of support, we try to assist a lot in companies' business growth. So, you know, as an example, we're a Kickstart gateway where we can help you get fully funded apprenticeships. We're also one of the trailblazing partners for an organization called Be the Business, which also offer a lot of business growth programs, like Mentoring for Growth, which is completely free of charge, that you can use to grow your business further. And then with thought leadership, we put together special interest groups, and that's obviously very much why we're here today. So if you want to know more about the STC, then you know, we are here to help. So please do get in touch. You know, have a look at our website, and obviously, you know, get in touch with us to see how we may be able to support you. But we're here today for our Wearable Technologies Special Interest Group, where the point of the groups is to really highlight a specific area, obviously in this case, wearable technologies. And with the events, what we want to do is we want to keep people up to date with like the latest development technologically, but we also talk about funding, we talk about collaborative opportunities, different projects out there, maybe even legislation or things like that. Basically anything that's relevant to that particular area. And each of our special interest group have a number of different champions to help us put together the events in terms of content. So the champions for this group are Steve Pauley from Ducatan, Colin Jackson from Partner Electronics, Phil Brady of B&B Mobile, and Nick Foxmail from Advancing Innovations. And gentlemen, thank you very much for helping us put together an excellent event this morning. So without further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker to the stage, which is Professor Dan Clark. So just invite Dan to the stage now. But yeah, as I said, you know, thanks for joining, and you know, this session will be recorded, and also there's the opportunity, obviously, to ask questions to all of our speakers after the session. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you should have it might be on the bottom. Actually, I'm not entirely sure. My interface is a little bit different from yours. But there's the opportunity to ask questions. So there's a Q&A functionality, so you can type your questions in, and obviously I'll be happy to post them to Dan and our other speakers. But there's also the functionality to raise your hand, and we can actually then hand you the microphone and invite you onto the stage. Your camera doesn't have to be on for that if you don't want it to be, but then you can ask your question sort of in person, and might save you on typing and things. So if you prefer that, please by all means do that. So that's kind of like a little bit of housekeeping. There's a chat functionality as well, of course, to keep in touch. So please feel free to use all of that. If you like what you're hearing, by the way, there's also a little emoticon, I think that's at the bottom of your screen, where you can throw up little smileys and all that sort of stuff. So if that's your thing, please go ahead and do that. But with all the housekeeping out of the way, I'll hand over to Dan for the first presentation. So over to you, Dan.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if I can make the technology speak for me. Okay. I'm sure somebody will tell me if this is not working. So I just hopefully now then we're in business and people can see my first slide. Let me hide this button at the bottom. I'm sure Pim or somebody will tell me if this is not working. So so good morning, everybody. And thank you, Pim, for this invitation to talk to this event this morning about wearable technology and its use in healthcare, particularly. It's no secret, is it, that the NHS healthcare in particular has had a very difficult time over the past year or so. Indeed, everybody's had a difficult time in the last year or so, thanks to the COVID pandemic. But it really has shone a light on some of the resourcing issues that we have within the NHS. And while we've had lots of praise, lots of gratitude for the way the NHS has responded to and coped with the amazing pressures that the pandemic has brought, some of the hard truths that's been illuminated is that the NHS was struggling to meet ends meet even before the pandemic struck. Indeed, if we go back 12 months or so before we'd heard of COVID, and if you'd asked healthcare professionals then what their views were about the future, well, you might well have got some relatively pessimistic answers. It's not like this is a new problem. There's been a lot of dire predictions and reports about the financial resources and the financial challenges facing the NHS. As I say, it's not a new problem, and in fact, we know what causes it. As a population, we're becoming older, we're becoming fatter, we're more prone to long-term conditions like diabetes, like dementia, like COPD, like cardiac problems. Over the last recent years, our life expectancy has risen quite dramatically, but our expectations on what the NHS can do for us has actually risen even faster. We now expect treated for and indeed cured from diseases and conditions which just a generation ago we were prepared to live with and indeed die from. And I say that like it's bad news. Of course it's not. It's a really good news story. As an industry, the NHS healthcare has been incredibly successful, but we're now at a risk of becoming victims of our own success. How do we provide more and more healthcare to more and more people at a time when our resources are restricted and in many cases reducing? And that's the great challenge facing not just the NHS, but all healthcare systems. And the solution, you'll be surprised to hear someone like me say, the solution lies within technology. But it's not just me as a healthcare technologist, as a clinical scientist, as a person who's spent their entire life essentially working in technology and health. It's not just me that says so. I was at a conference, at least 18 months ago now, where Simon Stevens was talking. Simon is the chief executive of the NHS, and he was saying that healthcare technology was going to be the only solution for the NHS's financial challenges. And one way in which technology might be able to help us with this financial challenge is by reducing the number of patients that we need to treat in acute centres, in hospitals. So it's not like the NHS needed any encouragement to try and treat patients away from hospitals. We know that patients do better away from acute centres, and we've been doing this. We've been looking after patients with technology, using technology in their own homes, in the community setting for a very long time. Slide here shows you just a few examples. Top left-hand corner is one of the most common devices that you'll see used in the community. It's a CPAP device for patients with breathing problems, with sleep apnea or COPD. In the centre at the top there, there's vacuum-assisted closure system for treating chronic wounds that are stubborn and won't recover without assistance. In the top right-hand corner, we can see a very small ambulatory syringe drive used for providing opiates for palliative care of patients who are being treated end-of-life pathways in their own home. And just to demonstrate that we can put incredibly sophisticated equipment into the home environment, the bottom left-hand picture is a home dialysis patient. And maybe one of the most common devices anywhere being used by patients in their own home is in the centre bottom picture, which is a blood glucose meter for type 1 diabetic management. And then finally on this slide, there's just a short-term example of using technology in the home environment, the community environment, with an ambulatory Holter-based ECG for 24-hour cardiac monitoring. So we know, and we have for a very long time, taking technology into the home and managing patients away from acute centres. And we've done this for a variety of reasons. Very clearly, there are some clinical benefits for doing that, but there are some system benefits, by which I mean it's cheaper by and large. If you take a patient into an acute setting, into a hospital, just have them lie in a bed in a hospital costs us somewhere between £350 and £380 per day, and that's before we do anything. That's before we apply any medications, any technology, any intervention. So £350 just to have the patient in hospital is clearly an expensive hotel. So if we can get our patients away from the hospital and treat them at home, so much. So we've known this for a long time and we've done it for a long time, but it's been really a slow progression. We haven't got that many patients treated as a percentage of the total patients in our hospitals in the home environment. But the landscape changed a wee bit a few years back, well, quite a few years back now, with the advent of technology that could be interrogated remotely. So our patients were at home, but we could interrogate the devices that they had remotely as our IT system improved. And the first key example of this were the implantable cardiac devices, defibs and pacing devices that we put into the chest cavities of patients to manage their conditions. And once we realized that we could monitor these at home, there was a sort of step change in the way we treated our patients. So previously, patients would periodically attend, quite regularly, in fact, the hospital to have their devices checked by the clinical team, have the data downloaded from them in the hospital environment, and have their consultation that way with their clinical team. With the advent, and we're talking quite a while ago now, of technology that could remotely access these devices, the patients could upload their own data via modems, and it was modems in those days, and the hospital team could then look at that data remotely without leaving the hospital, the patient without leaving their home, and those consultations could take place that way. And some of us thought at the time that this was going to be a step change in the way we managed patients remotely. There were a lot of patient conditions that could have been managed remotely, but very few actually did at that stage. And there are a number of reasons why this wasn't an explosion in telehealth, in remote managing patients. And the biggest of those reasons, I think, was probably this whole concept of data security. The NHS has rightly, I guess, been incredibly tight on personal data security, on patient data security. Patient data, clinician consultations are of course confidential, and that confidentiality is sacrosanct within the NHS. And the idea that we have patients at home whose data is up in the cloud and moving down fibre optics and being held on remote servers was a scary prospect for NHS professionals, and data security and confidentiality was seen as a major barrier for treating more patients at home. Another key reason why this revolution of treating patients at home didn't really take off was the whole idea of the personal touch in healthcare. Most healthcare professionals, of course, come into the profession to be with patients, to look after patients, and they don't come in to healthcare because they're keen on technology. By and large, and so there's a sort of cultural thing about having to see, having to touch patients in order to care for them, and that's a major barrier for adoption of these remote technologies. Another key area that's always caused concern is around user training. By users, we mean generally the patient or the patient's family. Medical technology can be seen as complicated, complex, difficult to use, and so the idea of putting it in the hands of a patient away from an acute centre, it was troubling to NHS professionals. And maybe the biggest single factor was this concept of pathway disruption that we were facing with this new technology. The NHS, like other healthcare systems, but particularly the NHS, is very, very set in its ways in terms of the patient pathway. It's a huge organisation. It's got very complex systems. It spends a lot of time looking at a lot of evidence to sort out what's the best pathway, the best way to treat our patients. And anything that's going to upset that disruptive technology that might upset that is a challenge for the NHS to deal with. They might want to deal with it. It's just moving all of those systems to change the patient path, to change the patient pathway, can be seen as really quite a challenge. And so although the technology was evolving to allow us to monitor patients, treat patients, care for patients remotely, it was going really, really slowly, and there were a lot of barriers slowing the NHS up in terms of how it was going to look after more patients away from the acute centre in their home environments. But there's been a couple of really significant drivers for change over recent years. I'd love to be able to sit here this morning and tell you that the principal reason we were accelerating the number of patients we were now managing in the community was because the NHS had finally come to see that the benefits of remote healthcare far outweigh any of these risks, any of these challenges I've outlined. I'd like to tell you that it was the NHS that was driving this change. The truth is, the two biggest drivers of the acceleration in away from centres have not come from the NHS itself. The first has come from the explosion in the consumer market for wellness, fitness devices. Fitbit, for example, is now, because of the consumer market, Fitbit and Apple and Google and others are driving the technology rapidly for things like Fitbit and Apple Watches. All of a sudden, it's become cool to wear essentially what could be deemed a medical device. This whole concept of sharing our data, which the NHS has been so terrified in terms of its data security, all of a sudden we don't care. Probably most of us in the audience are wearing Fitbits or something similar, and we seem quite happy that it's measuring a lot of our data, what we do, how we do it, where we do it sometimes, and sharing that to a third-party device somewhere up there in IT cloud land. So that cultural thing of sharing personal information, securely of course, but sharing personal information seems to have been broken by the consumer market rather than the healthcare market. And then the other big change, which we can't hide from at the moment, of course, is coronavirus and the effect that the pandemic has had on the NHS and indeed on all healthcare systems. When the pandemic first broke and we were struggling with that first peak a year ago now, the NHS essentially shut down all its non-emergency services. So we were concentrating all of our efforts on treating coronavirus patients. We were still keeping a small amount of emergency work going, so our trauma work was going and our emergency cancer work was going, but almost all the electives just stopped more or less overnight. GPs closed their front doors and weren't seeing patients in their surgeries, and all of a sudden we didn't have an NHS that we would recognise. And so as we got over that first peak, it became clear that we needed to do something about treating all these patients, and we couldn't necessarily bring them all back into acute centres, physical settings. And so people, NHS people, healthcare professionals, far from being reluctant to use technology to treat patients at home, suddenly were clamouring for solutions so that they could treat their patients away from the physical centre. So that change in culture and that development of technology driven by the consumer world has brought us to a point where now there are a huge pile of possibilities about remote sensing, remote managing, remote treatment of our patients. And this wee slide is just meant to demonstrate some of the possibilities of this new brave world, if you like, of healthcare technology, of keeping patients away from our acute centres. So we can imagine, and I've managed to go talking for most of this presentation already without actually talking about the technologies themselves. But if we now look at the technologies themselves, we have a whole range of technologies. I know we're going to hear about some of them later this morning that can measure physiological parameters of our patients, of people, in wearable technologies, in fabrics, in things like Fitbits, in things like the Internet of Things connected devices that you would have in your home, in things like camera technologies and sensor technologies that unobtrusively can monitor a whole range of parameters, physiological parameters about our patients, without people even knowing that this is happening. So in that center there, if we can imagine a whole range of technologies applied in the domestic environment that are measuring these attributes of people, they can squirt them up to the cloud-based computing systems, and I've not even touched on AI, but AI now can help us with how we manage those vast loads of data that we can gather in this way. So we can gather this data from an individual, we can send it up to the cloud, and we can then compare all of that data for that individual, let's say for me, with what that data was for me yesterday and last week and last month and last year. So we can manage and monitor and look at all the trends in my personal data about my health, and not just compare it to me, in this brave new world, we could compare it to other people like me. So I'm a man in my late 50s. So we can copy that data and we can look at that data and we can compare it to what people men in their late 50s ought to have. And we can spot any changes, any alarms, any alerts that might cause concern for a healthcare professional. So long before a patient shows any clinical symptoms of anything, our cloud-based AI managing and analyzing all of their data might be able to stop things going wrong. And then what happens then? Well, if it's an alert, if it's a short-term acute issue, they can just send a piece of information back to the individual, to their mobile phone. And typically we might see an example of this. And we do see examples of this with patients with, for example, diabetic foot ulcers, so patients with long-term diabetes who may be at risk of developing foot ulcers. And one of the key things there is to make sure they don't overpressure their feet. So they could be wearing wearable technology that measures the pressure in their feet. If that gets to a point throughout the day where they've been on their feet too long and the pressure is too high and they're at risk of developing tissue damage, then an alert could be sent back to the patient to tell them essentially just to sit down and put their feet up. Or it could be something significantly more important than that, which needs intervention from healthcare professionals who can then take an intervention, send a nurse around, send a doctor around, send another healthcare professional around. So we could imagine this brave new world of wearable technology and cloud-based artificial intelligence computing, where we can gather all this information about a patient without them even knowing. Without the patient even recognizing that they've got symptoms, we can identify when their health condition is worsening. Without them even having to do anything, we can then send an intervention either directly or via healthcare professionals. So this is an exciting potential. And you might think, well, that's all very futuristic and a long way from today. But actually, there's a technology that's essentially doing that now. People may or may not recognize this device. In the top left-hand picture, we can see somebody wearing a Freestyle Sensor. So this is a wearable technology. It's measuring interstitial glucose, which is a surrogate for blood glucose, and diabetic patients can wear this device to monitor their blood glucose level and control the amount of insulin they need to inject. So in this picture, you can see the sensor comes with a meter, and the meter takes all the readings, but it can equally send those readings to an iPhone or any smartphone, which can then upload that data to a cloud-based computing system. And this is the sort of thing in the bottom left-hand corner that they can see in that cloud-based computing system, and the healthcare professionals in the hospital can see that in real time if they choose to. So that's going on now. And if things are going wrong with the patient's blood glucose, the device can be set to identify hypo or hyper glycemic events and send an alert either directly to the patient or indeed to their medical team. So that kind of system is actually already happening now in our healthcare system. And there's a lot of debate about the potential for this moving forward. There's a lot of ethical discussions about the ethics of having all this data about an individual when they know about it. But so opinion is divided on whether this is in fact a brave new world where we can identify things that are going wrong with your body even before you're aware of anything, and intervene and therefore prevent diseases progressing and keep you well without you even getting ill, let alone having to come to an acute centre. So some people are talking about this as being a brave new world or a panacea for healthcare solutions. Other people, of course, are very frightened by the idea that we can get all this data about an individual without them really even knowing, and manage them remotely in this way. So the debate is now on about whether this is indeed panacea that we're looking for in healthcare, or just some big brother type scenario where big organizations control you and your data. So I hope that gave you just a little flavor of the potential for wearable technologies in healthcare. If I come back to the question I set myself at the beginning, is wearable technology for health a passing fad or the start of a brave new world? Well, I think we can half answer that. It is most definitely not just a passing fad. Wearable technologies have become embedded in healthcare, and now the potential benefits that they can bring can't be put back in the box, and wearable technology is definitely here to stay and will be developing rapidly. Is it a brave new world? It's yet to be decided whether or not all those benefits that I've alluded to might come to pass, but there is certainly the potential for a huge amount of exciting developments in the field of wearable technologies and health. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm obviously happy to take any questions now.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dan. Much appreciated. We do actually have a question come in. This is from Simon McMaster, who we'll hear from later on today. His question is, will NHS change or revert to type after COVID-19? Good question, I think.
Oh, my goodness. The NHS has changed because of COVID. There's been a step change in the way we manage things. So it will not, I don't think, revert to how we were 14, 15 months ago. We're in a strange position at the moment in the NHS, in that we would like to think, and when you see the data coming out every night on the news about the falling numbers in our hospitals, the falling death rate, which is fantastic, of course, and people would like to think that we're over it now and we're moving forward, but we face two continuing challenges. One is COVID itself, which has not gone away, and we'll continue to have to struggle to manage that. But God willing, we will not go back to the state that we were in a year ago. But the other one is we've essentially gone 12 months without doing our routine work, and we've got to find ways now of addressing that work. The funding has been amazing, that's kept us going, but by midpoint this year, that funding is going to run out, and we're going to be facing incredible challenges. So we come back to where I started with this presentation. We've got to find ways to use technology to manage more patients away from the hospital, to manage patients more effectively. All those challenges that the NHS and other healthcare systems were facing 15 months ago, and they were huge challenges, they've not gone away, and if anything, they've got worse. So I think there's going to be a step change. I think a lot of the remote consultations that have gone on during COVID, using technology like this, like Google Meet, like Zoom, and more sophisticated, similar technology for healthcare consultations, we won't go back. That will carry on mostly. Those challenges I was talking about data security, they've essentially evaporated. We still have those challenges, don't get me wrong, and there are still concerns about sharing personal data about patients through remote sites.
Yeah, we have Jocelyn talking about that next, so I'm sure she's got a couple of things to say on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very much looking forward to that. But yes, I think a cultural shift has taken, and I don't think we can go back. Is the bottom line.
Excellent. Colin Jackson actually raised his hand, so I'll hand him the mic, and then I've seen that we've got another question as well. So let's hand the mic over to Colin. See how that goes. So all as well, we'll get Colin on the stage. Colin?
Hi there. Morning, Dan. In terms of creating these new wearable technologies, do you think this is likely to be driven by requests for technology from the NHS, or people creating things and offering them to the NHS?
Gosh, that's a good question. I mean, that's true. That's a question that's applicable to all technologies. Are we pushing or pulling technology drive the NHS? And truth is, it's always been, and probably always will be, a bit of both. I think right at the moment, the NHS is doing more pulling than it has done for a long time in terms of wearable technology. It keeps asking the questions: how can we do more in terms of managing patients and actually keeping people well before they become patients? I keep using the word patients. You can see I spent 37 years working in the NHS. So, but actually what we need to be talking about is wearable technologies for all of us to keep us fit longer. So I think there is a bigger pull now than there's ever been coming from the NHS, asking the question, how can we manage? And I know Simon's going to talk about some of these technologies in a bit, but there's a pile of other technologies out there, and the NHS are asking those questions now. But there's always been the case that innovators develop new ideas, new technologies, and bring them forward looking for solutions and adoption. And in fact, it's one of the areas that my team get involved with particularly, is taking those new ideas and helping companies make them NHS ready. So very often, typically, we see new innovators come to us with ideas, and they're often driven actually by personal circumstances. Either the inventor has invented something because they themselves have a health condition that they recognise needed a technological solution, or a family member has. And so a big part of some of the work that my team do is helping innovators take those technologies, bring them in, and identify not just the single application that they might already know about for that technology, but looking at what the NHS might want from that technology, and helping the innovator get their device NHS ready. So the short answer there was it always has been a bit of both. It always will be a bit of both. Right at the moment, the NHS is asking a lot more questions in terms of wearable technologies than it has done for a very long time.
Excellent. Thank you, Colin. We for everybody interested in that and wanting to follow up, we will be sharing Dan's contact details and a presentation with people afterwards as well. So he is available to follow up afterwards. We've had another question come in, and then I've noticed that somebody's raised their hand, so we'll come to that person next. I don't know how controversial this is, but Duncan Banks, who we'll also hear from later on, is saying GPs don't trust data from wearable technology. I don't know how true that statement is or not. Do you think this will change?
Okay, so I'm not sure where that's coming from, that question. That GPs don't trust this, and doctors, healthcare professionals don't trust data that comes from fitness devices. So if by wearable technologies, Duncan, you mean Fitbits and Apple Watches, then absolutely, I hear what you're saying, and that's absolutely true. I think even that is changing. A Fitbit is not a medical device. I'm wearing a Fitbit, have done for years. It does tell me my heart rate, but it's not an ECG. It's not going to be identify things that a 7-lead ECG would. But it gives me a whole pile of other information if I cared to analyze it, or my GP cared to analyze it. Even if it's not accurate, it is giving me a whole pile of other information that I could never hope to get without wearable technology. So there's been a reluctance, you're absolutely right, for GPs and other healthcare professionals to recognize the value of consumer-based health and well-being devices. I think that even that is changing slightly, but that won't change much. But I think we can see a time where the Fitbits of this world drive the technology, but then a medical device manufacturer converts it into something which is acceptable to healthcare professionals, and start using that. And I also think we'll see a time when healthcare professionals start to accept that lower quality data, but more of it, can sometimes help them diagnose and see things in their patients that high quality data, but only available when you turn up at the GP. So I mean, how important is your ECG when you turn up at the GP? You're probably nervous, you're probably excited, you're probably waited in the waiting room for a long time, and then they take your ECG and it gives them a spot reading of what it was for that 5-minute period. It might be bang on correct in that 5-minute period, but it's not reflective of what your ECG would be throughout a 24-hour period. So GPs and others have got to get over that hump. But we have to recognise that Fitbits, Apple Watches are not medical devices and not reliably give us accurate information. It's a different set of information.
Excellent, thank you very much. So I'll now hand over the microphone to Shai, and I've seen that we've got another question come in as well, so we'll address that next. But let's invite Shai into the.
Thank you very much.
Morning.
Dan, great speech, and I understand about the uptake of technology and so forth, being a bit hesitant in the NHS sector, and on the other hand, the Fitbits of this world taking off in the consumer sector. Is it because you think that the Fitbits of this world, the Stravas and all these other apps, are appealing to a different part of our mindset, which they're appealing to the fun bit, the competitive bit, the sharing, the communication, the chat, the conversation over soap operas, and in the evenings you now talk about how many steps you did instead. And the health sector, on the other hand, is looking at preventing us from dying or thinking about other morbidities which are not quite as much fun as talking about how many steps I did today and boring people with that.
I think you're asking a really interesting question of the wrong person. Yeah, I recognise what you're saying. We've had that debate. We've had that debate really. Why? And it may be a generational thing. You know, young. I say that people today. I shouldn't be ageist. People today are quite happy to share a whole pile of personal information via Twitter, via Instagram, via Facebook, whatever it is, in a way that certainly when I was 17, 18, it wouldn't have occurred to me to talk about the sorts of things that people talk about now. So it may be a generational thing that people are quite happy to talk about things, personal things, in a way that the previous generations weren't. It may be partly that. It may be exactly what you've said, that people are quite happy to talk about aspects of their health and well-being when it's seen as fun, competitive, supportive. Less likely to do so if it was relating to their prostate or a lump they found in their breast or whatever. I don't know. That's a really interesting social question. The sociologist, I'm sure, in the future will analyse that. But I do think that we've moved a long way now. We had a really exciting project turned down for funding a few years ago. Not really using wearables, but using intrusive technology, using cameras in hospitals to identify and track patients and look at their behaviour. And particularly, we were looking at the likelihood of patients falling. So we were trying to prevent falling in older patients. Two places older patients fall most commonly in hospitals is right next to the bed when they first get out of it. So we had technology that could pick that up. But then the second place that they fall most commonly is in the toilet. So we wanted to put cameras in the toilets. They weren't actual cameras. They were looking at spatial movement, but nonetheless they looked and felt like cameras. But we never got ethics permission to do that. But the lead consultant at the time, medical consultant at the time, was very unhappy that we didn't get the funding. We didn't get the funding on the grounds of dignity and privacy, and he said there's no dignity at all in lying on a toilet floor with your head stoved in. So we may have got to a point now where people's perception of dignity and privacy is different to where it was a few years ago. And the benefits that we can bring by having this data outweighs those concerns.
Yeah, I think my point is more about how the NHS might reach out through sociologists and psychologists and marketing folks into making this whole thing more acceptable. But it's not just about microchips and graphene. It's also about people's behavior. And maybe there's a missing link here.
Yeah, no, really good point. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Shai. So the question that was posted was kind of more of a comment from Teresa, saying Fitbit is currently being used as a medical device with permission for a sleep disruption research program in a hospital setting. It needed lots of permissions and approvals, but the boundaries are being pushed. So coming back to the previous point, maybe those non-medical devices can actually serve a function in programs, which is quite interesting. But I want to move on to a question posed by Monica Das. And she's asking, what specific roadblocks are there within the NHS and what is being done to allow progress in this area? Are there barriers to adoption that we need to overcome? And how does that go?
I don't think there are any more. There's always difficulties with implementation of new technologies. I still think a key one is data security. But systems for data security, and I won't trespass on the speakers coming up, but the systems in place for data security are better, and I think we have more trust in them. I think public perception. And we're back almost at the previous question. Public perception of data security is perhaps different now than it was with all the data breaches that stories in the news of a few years ago. So I think that's a key one. Another key one for the NHS is it's and all healthcare systems, particularly NHS, is it's very evidentially based. So it likes to see the evidence, but getting the evidence from these devices is difficult if you can't get widespread adoption of them. So we need to find a way of demonstrating the value proposition of medical devices, wearable technology, so the NHS professionals can see that it's not just a Fitbit, it does bring these other added healthcare benefits. So I think we need to do a piece of work about value proposition of wearable technologies.
But from a company point of view, so if I was a tech company and I had something that I wanted to basically bring into the NHS and saying, hey, this is a great product, you know, do you guys want to take it on? How can we move that forward? Are there roadblocks there? I mean, how do you go about it as a company to get involved? Is that easy? Is that hard?
I don't want to come over all sales pitchy, but you can approach us. We have a team of people who help people get devices accepted to the NHS. There are a number of things the NHS looks for in when adopting a new piece of device. One is obviously regulatory compliance. The second is the evidence that the device actually does what you say it does, which is what I was saying. It's sometimes difficult to get that evidence, but that's that. So the gathering the evidence to demonstrate that it does bring the value that you're suggesting in your claim. Financially, there's, you know, the NHS, I was just touching on it slowly, briefly at the end of my presentation. The NHS was facing a massive financial crisis. That's got considerably worse because of COVID. So any device that increases the net cost to the NHS is going to struggle. So we have to put cases together that demonstrate the wearable technology, or whatever the new technology is, saves money, or at least brings real benefits, that we can value that economic side of that. So there are a number of those sort of hurdles that any new product, wearable or otherwise, will to address. So if you have a technology, then please contact us and we'll see if we can help you roadmap you into that.
Excellent stuff. Thank you very much for that, Dan. So in the interest of time, I think we'll leave it there. But Dan, thank you very much for joining us. As I said before, we'll share Dan's presentation and contact details so people can follow up. But thank you very much, Dan. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so we'll swiftly move on to our next speaker, which is Jocelyn Pauley. So let me invite Jocelyn to the stage, and hopefully she'll join us in a moment. Where, as indicated, we'll talk about sort of privacy and data and all of that good stuff. But it's an area I know very little about, so I'm not going to say anything any further and just hand over to Jocelyn. So Jocelyn, over to you, please.
Thanks very much, Pim. Good to join you all this morning. Just let me share my slides with you. And hopefully you can see that. So good morning, good to be with you all this morning. My name's Jocelyn Pauley. I'm a partner at Gowling WLG, and this morning I'm looking at wearables through a privacy lens, compliance with the rules around how you handle personal data in compliance with the laws about privacy.
Jocelyn,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. At the moment, we just see a black screen.
Apologies, that has not worked then.
And not quite your slides.
Okay,
yeah.
One moment.
Oh, we see now an awful lot of ourselves in an infinity.
Yes, yes. No, let me,
over there.
obviously it works in the trial and then obviously doesn't when you want to do it.
Happens all the time.
In real life.
But let's try that again. Right, we can see the PowerPoint interface now. That's great.
Excellent. And hopefully if I move on, you can see that too, Pim.
Yeah, is it possible to put that full screen, or?
On my screen, it is full screen.
Is there a way to swap those screens around, because we're still seeing the PowerPoint interface? It might be at the top in view. All we can do is simply that way. Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah, let's try that.
There we go. Obviously works fine when you test it and then not when you come to do it for real.
This is a good workaround, thank you.
No problems. So I'm looking at handling personal data through a privacy compliance lens. Is what you want to do with personal data in whatever context going to be compliant with the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, which many of you have probably heard of, and which is still the law in this country following Brexit, because essentially we took that law and embedded it into the laws of England and Wales, whereas before it was an EU-derived law. So this is still what we talk about when we talk about privacy legislation in the UK post-Brexit. And in thinking about personal data and privacy in the context of wearables, it's important to think about it in all the various guises it might take. So we've heard a lot from Dan about wearables in a medical context, and that's certainly one setting where there are endless examples of different wearables measuring different things about people, from their glucose to their temperature to drug adherence, diabetes monitoring. So many different ways a wearable could be used. But obviously you find them in other contexts as well, maybe even as part of your job. Individuals in warehouses or logistics locations are equipped with wearable devices, partly to track their own performance and efficiency, partly to help them maybe locate the items that they're looking for and having to pack. You find them in a sporting context, which again we've heard a bit about this morning already, be that just as amateurs who are interested in where they've run, how quickly they went and how does that compare with their run last week, to professional athletes who are looking in much more forensic detail at how various parts of their anatomy has coped with a particular exercise. Did it stress them? Did they achieve their desired heart rate, etc., to feed that back into their formal training regimes. And then there's a play aspect to it as well, using these things just for fun, for gaming, and children using them as well as part of children's toys. And it's really important when you're talking about data protection to understand that broader context in which you're operating, to think about and to understand what data is being collected and what is it being used for. Because everything about data protection is all about what do we need to do to protect this particular type of data in the particular way it is being used. So context is very important to enable you to do that assessment. So in thinking about different types of wearables, I just popped down various different types of data that may well be being recorded in any of the scenarios I've talked about. Obviously, not all of these elements of data will be collected in all of those scenarios. And you can see I've split it into generic personal data and then what the legislation calls special category data. So this is a defined list of particular types of data which are afforded higher levels of protection in the Gdpr, and where there are more limited grounds on which you can use it, on what you can use it for. So again, that's why it's important to establish at the outset what data you're collecting, because slightly different rules within the Gdpr will apply to those different pieces of data. So then you move on to thinking, well, that's the data, but what's the broader context beyond that in which I'm processing it? Whose privacy are we actually talking about? Now, for most wearables, it will be the privacy of the person wearing the device or that the device is monitoring. But it could also be others around them as well. If you think of something like the Google Glass spectacles when they were being tested in various environments, or things like body-worn cameras used in a law enforcement context, sort of general security and surveillance. There you need to worry some about the privacy of the individual who's wearing the device, because naturally it will capture some data about them, but principally its focus is actually on privacy of others around it, whose movements and images and potentially audio will be captured and stored. So you need to identify whose privacy are we thinking about in those environments. We also need to think a little bit about the types of people, because if the wearable is embedded in a child's toy, then the data that will be gathered is that belonging to a child. And the ICO, that's the Information Commissioner, who's the regulator of GDPR in this country, they have specific guidance on how you comply with GDPR, where the information you're gathering is about children. There's now an age-appropriate code of practice released last year, which goes into a lot of detail about how you need to follow the rules if the data you're gathering is about a child, because you're going to have to do things differently in explaining to them how you use their data and what you use it for, because their language and understanding will be less complex than that of an adult. So you might need to think about a privacy notice for them and something separate for the parent or guardian, so that each can have use of data explained to them on their own level. Broader context, once you've identified whose data is being processed, Thinking about just the sheer volume of the data, it is very tempting now that we have the sensors and the technologies to collect a lot of data about a lot of different things in any given scenario, to suck that all into the tool or the sensor or the solution and capture all of it as part of a wearable. But the GDPR principles say that data minimization is one element of compliance. You're only allowed to capture and process the data that you really need for the purpose for which you're going to process that data. So if anything's just a nice to have and you can't justify why it's needed for your purpose, it's not something you could be capturing. But even if you are only capturing the data you need, you're still capturing so much more data than we have ever had in the past. So that is one consideration, just the sheer volume of it and making people aware of that. I've talked a little bit already about the purpose for which you're using the data, and that's really important to understand if you are producing a wearable device. And thinking about that use from different points of view as well. So there is what the device is designed to do, and what the user of that device is intended to do with it, and making sure that the data that is collected is relevant to that purpose, and clearly stating that to the user of the device. But as the producer or the supplier of the device or the broader solution, thinking about what you want to use that data for as well, if that is distinct from what the user of the wearable will be using it for. Dan referred to AI and big data techniques. Now that we have those, there is an increasing desire to take these large data sets and run further analytics on them to try to understand different insights or information. So if, for example, I'm an employer of individuals in a warehouse who are wearing devices to track their movements to assist them with their jobs, I might want to understand how do people perform at different times of day or in different scenarios and different controls. And if that's something I want to do with that data, I need to let the people who are wearing these devices know that that's what I'm going to do. Or a step behind that, maybe I'm the manufacturer of that device and I want to pull in data from everyone wearing it to run broader analyses, maybe because the wearable tracks location and I'm trying to use that in a different context to extract where do people go in a town and therefore traffic flow solutions or something quite separate. All of that needs to have been thought through and explained to individuals when they start wearing and using the devices. So you need to really understand that purpose from every angle, because then that flows into, well, who's going to see this data and where is it going to go? And I mean that both in the context of different companies involved in the supply chain who will be holding it, storing it, deleting it, sharing it on social media, whatever's going to happen in that chain, and where those people are based from an international country point of view. So you need to build up all that context and understand what it is, because where you don't want to get to is a context that trips into what I've called there the creep factor. And by that I mean doing something with data which inherently feels a little bit too intrusive from what something is meant to do. There are definitely examples in the press of particularly children's toys that are listening and watching all the time to what's going on around them and capturing that data, which starts to give a slightly creepy feeling. There's something in your home, in a domestic environment, listening to what your children are doing when they're playing. Or there was the example of the Alexa devices, which are listening out for their keywords so that you can use the functionality which they are designed to give. But there are examples of those recordings, those short excerpts being stored, and then employees accessing those and listening to them, which is obviously not what that data was designed to be used for. So that's what I mean by the creep factor. You don't want to be on the side of the line where people feel, this device is doing something I didn't expect it to do with my data. Partly it's not good PR. Probably it also means, though, you're not complying with the GDPR and the rules around processing data. Because what GDPR was designed to do, what the regulators were trying to achieve when they created that new piece of legislation back in 2016, was this environment of trust and transparency. The regulators believed that it is beneficial for everybody if there's this trusting relationship between individuals providing data or wearing devices that collect data and the organisations providing those devices. So if you have that environment of trust, individuals be more inclined to give or share more data, and that means that organisations can innovate or provide better services, and that's good for the individual. And innovation is good for society and understanding and the economy. So you end up with this virtuous circle with data at the heart of it. So that's what GDPR was designed to do. Not maybe as some people think about locking data down and preventing sharing and preventing accessing. It is meant to facilitate it in a framework and a structure where everyone understands what's going on, this transparency point. It's really clear what's happening to data, so everyone is comfortable with it, and that companies processing the data are accountable for their actions. So that's the framework that GDPR sets up, and that's why it's really important that if something feels creepy, it's probably on the wrong side of that trust and transparency line. So I wanted to look at, if I was a company producing a wearable, be it the hardware or the software or the end-to-end solution, what do I need to think about in terms of privacy compliance? Because as Dan mentioned, part of selling these devices is showing that they are compliant with regulations, which in a healthcare scenario would be specific healthcare regulations in addition, but will always have a privacy angle to it in any context. So the first thing I would do is I would do what's called a data protection impact assessment. These are required by the legislation in certain mandatory scenarios. The guidance we have from the European Data Protection Board, that broadens out those scenarios. And one of the factors it would look at in assessing whether you need to do a DPIA is this an innovative technology, which wearables almost certainly will be, and the guidance does mention wearables. Is it processing biometric data? Is there any element of tracking? Am I dealing with potentially vulnerable data subjects, such as the elderly or children? Or is there an element of invisible processing, so gathering data and using it in a way that's not even particularly obvious to people? If you hit any of those factors or a combination of them, then the regulators are strongly suggesting that a DPIA ought to be done. The test is the processing likely to result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of individuals? And all those things I just mentioned around wearables and biometrics and tracking, those are areas where the regulators believe there could be a high risk to individuals. So DPIA is essentially a risk assessment where you set out, what data am I collecting? What's the flow of that data? Where does it go and who's processing and what are they doing with it? And then you apply the principles in the regulations to assess whether there are any points in the chain where there are risks to individuals and are there steps you could take to mitigate those risks. It might sound like a sort of a paper-heavy process to go through, but these can be really valuable documents. If anything goes wrong at a later stage, if there should be a breach, or if there are challenges from individuals, if you can evidence that at the start of the process you sat down and thought about your GDPR compliance, and you mapped out the risks, and you assessed them, and you looked at what you could do to mitigate, if you have that contemporaneous documentation, that's really powerful to show to a regulator, say, look, we were aware of what we had to do under the legislation, and this is how we tried to do it. The regulator is going to be a lot more sympathetic to that, even if ultimately you made a wrong judgment call or something happened in reality, which is one of those things. There are always risks. You are much less likely to find yourself on the wrong side of a regulator's enforcement decision if you can show that you went through that thought process. Privacy by design and privacy by default is another way of looking at that process, if you like, of designing a system, and it would be picked up by a DPIA. What it means is that if you're building a process where personal data will be involved, you have to build privacy and privacy considerations into that system from the outset. What the regulators didn't want is privacy to be an afterthought and some kind of bolt-on to a product. They want to see that as you build a solution, the default option all the way through that solution is that privacy is protected and not opened up and not shared unnecessarily. And so your DPIA would be one way of showing how you have built privacy into your solution. Absolutely key then around this idea of trust and transparency is the privacy notice. So this is the statement that the provider of a system, the data controller, gives to an individual that explains what data is being collected, what it's being used for, the legal grounds that you have for collecting it, and other details such as security of systems, international transfers, and individuals' rights. It is a really important document. We have seen regulators take action where, although what the data controller was doing was not a problem, the fact that they hadn't told people that that's what they were doing was a problem. It's a really important document. And in a wearables context, the challenges around it can be, how would you give it to individuals? What's the right way to provide it? Wearables are often small, physically small devices, often don't have a screen. So how are you going to give that information to the purchaser of a product so they understand what data is going to be collected and what are you doing with it? There is a challenge around language as well, around making them concise and clear so that people can understand them. But often this processing is not necessarily that straightforward, particularly in a medical context. And you have to give people sufficient information that they can understand truthfully what's going on and make a decision about whether or not they're comfortable using the product. The other language challenge is that regulators want manufacturers and suppliers to be really specific about what data are you actually using and what are you doing with it. Whereas suppliers of systems want to build in a bit more flexibility than that to slightly future-proof their privacy notices and use language saying, well, we may do this. And regulators don't like that may, because there's a degree of uncertainty in that. But from a provider's point of view, you want to build in flexibility for the future, because if you change what you do with personal data, you have to reissue these privacy notices to people in advance so they are aware of that change. And as part of the privacy notice, you also need to be explaining to people how they can control and use the products that you're providing with it. So giving user controls so they have as granular control as they can over elements like, say, if their location is turned on or not, or if sound is turned on or not, what different elements of data are being collected. So obviously you need to explain the benefits to people of adding that data into the tool and what that gives them versus not having it there. Security, you couldn't talk about data protection without talking about security, although I think you'll understand from the context of the slides, security isn't everything when we talk about data protection. It is one element of the whole range of things that you have to comply with and think about. Obviously, it is important, particularly in all these systems that work remotely, transferring data over the internet, through remote servers to various different parties. It's an issue that people are very alive to because it's a concept that's fairly easy to grasp. It's often in the press. The Internet of Things devices have not had the greatest publicity around the level of their security, often because if it's Internet of Things around inanimate objects, security seems low on the list of attributes that that device needs to have. Clearly for wearables, there'll be a much higher level of security that's required and that is usually designed in because there's an awareness that these devices handle personal data. But clearly you have to be able to demonstrate that the security that's applied to a wearable and the entire end-to-end solution, not just the physical device, but the software elements too, is sufficiently strong to protect the type of data that's within a tool. And that's where if a solution is handling medical data, you'll clearly need more stringent and better security controls than if it was simply some kind of toy you were using. Data subject rights are obviously important. GDPR introduced more rights for individuals than we had previously. So in designing a solution, you need to think about how you would let individuals enforce those rights. So how you'd be able to give them copies of all their data. People have rights to ask for data to be erased, to object to processing. Importantly, more so for wearables than I think other solutions that process personal data, there's a right for individuals to port their data to a supplier of an equivalent system. And this is something I can see being particularly relevant for wearables. It's not widely used by individuals, but I can see it being particularly relevant if I wanted to switch from one Fitbit type accessory to another one. I might want to take across all my exercise history. That could be something I wanted to do. So you need to think about how you would facilitate that within the environment. International transfers, they are a more and more complex area of data protection compliance. We had a ruling last July called Schrems 2, which requires operators of systems to go through more regulatory hurdles, do more risk assessments before you can transfer personal data to countries outside of the UK and Europe in compliance with the legislation. So it's just an area that needs more analysis and more regulatory steps taken before you can complete those transfers. Profiling is an area that has more regulation around it. By profiling, I mean putting together lots of different pieces of data about an individual, try and learn something about them or to predict something about them. So some of these devices, again, in a medical context, that would be relevant. The regulations require more explanation around profiling, again, so people are clear what's happening, and also a right to have a human review decisions that maybe the device or the software is taking about them in an automated fashion.
Jocelyn, sorry to interrupt again.
Here, repurposing of anonymised and aggregated data, linking back to what I was talking about earlier about understanding the purpose for which you want to use data. If you do want to have the ability to strip out the personal elements of that data and simply use it on an aggregated, anonymised basis, that's something you need to have decided up front to decide how you're going to do that in a compliant manner.
Jocelyn, sorry.
And this last point is certainly not the least point. Everything I've talked about needs flowing through a supply chain. So if you are ultimately the data controller of the data in this scenario, you're responsible for everything that people who are processing data on your behalf in your supply chain do for you. So there are requirements that you need to put in your contracts with them, certain minimum mandatory clauses. You will also need to do your own due diligence on those suppliers to check they are capable of being GDPR compliant, and through the life of those contracts to audit them and check that what they're doing does live up to what you ask them to do. So the last point on the list, but certainly not a small or insubstantial one. And that was everything I was going to talk about today. It's something of a whistle-stop tour through privacy compliance in a wearables context. But I think it touched on the main areas that you would want to think about if you were a provider or a supplier of those solutions.
Excellent, thank you very much. We seem to have a small issue at the end there with the screen sharing, but I think everybody managed to see most of it anyway. And we have a number of questions coming in straight away, so we'll kick off with that. So we'll start with Dr. Duncan Banks. Possibly quite a technical question. What is the difference between GDPR 2016 and the Data Protection Act 2018?
Sure. So this has nothing to do with Brexit, as you can tell from the dates. So the Data Protection Act 2018 was the government in England and Wales implementing additional and complementary regulations to GDPR. So the broad GDPR gave individual member states, as we were at that time, rights to make additional rules around certain areas in the GDPR. So the major one that's captured by the DPA is when you're using special category data. GDPR sets out your basic grounds for processing, but then you also have to look in the DPA because there are additional requirements and qualifiers and parameters. So if I wanted to process special category data for complying with employment obligations, I then look down into the DPA to see additional parameters and compliance that I have to comply with. So I might need an appropriate policy document, for example, setting out more detail about my processing of that special category data. DPA also has a section on processing data if you are a law enforcement body, which again is clearly an area that member states individually have legislated on. And if you look across Europe, every country will have an equivalent set of regulations now. It took everyone a while to get them in place that work with the GDPR and give additional rules for particular elements of data processing.
And where is it possible to find guidance on that? I mean, obviously people can ring you, I presume, but is there a place where you can find out more about how all of that works and where you can get the information on that?
Certainly. So the ICO's website is an excellent resource for data protection generally. It's obviously not going to take you through each article of the legislation. They have much more accessible guides, but it's all very well linked together now. So you can go in and look at the guidance section. It will walk you through the guide. I think it's now called the Guide to the UK GDPR, obviously updating the lingo now we've exited from the European Union. And it will take you through all the different principles in the GDPR, international transfers, exemptions, data subject rights, etc. And it pulls in the DPA 2018 requirements. There are flags on the pieces of guidance that they haven't got around to updating yet, because they also have some sort of topic-specific guidance. So, for example, CCTV and body-worn cameras, there's specific pieces of guidance on those. And in some of those areas, they have updated it following GDPR and the DPA 2018, and some they haven't. But a lot of the principles, even from pre-GDPR, are still valid. They've been carried through. On the whole, they've been enhanced and more things have been added to them. I can only think of one thing that was taken away when we switched from the DPA 1998 into GDPR and the DPA 2018.
Excellent. Thank you. Before we go to Colin's question, one thing that I was kind of wondering about, is there a huge amount of variety in different markets? So for instance, if you had a device and you comply to all the rules and regulations in the EU, but then you wanted to go to the States or Japan or whatever other country, are they vastly different, or is it more or less the same thing and you only need to make slight tweaks? Or
yeah, it's a really good question, because obviously it's a global market, isn't it? You want to be operating in as many jurisdictions as you can. Generally, across the globe, GDPR sets the gold standard for regulation of processing personal data. Increasing numbers of countries are implementing data privacy regimes sort of as we speak. Generally, they look to GDPR as the standard to meet, and they will imitate and copy certain elements of it, but it's definitely a moving feast at the moment. So we had the California Consumer Privacy Act a few years ago. There's now similar legislation in Virginia, and they are looking in the US at a federal personal data piece of legislation, which would be a huge step for the US if that was on a uniform basis. You've got Dubai in the UAE. They had brand new privacy legislation earlier this year. China had privacy legislation a couple of years ago. Japan has recently had an adequacy decision from the European Commission. So that's in an international transfer context. The European Commission recognizing that the laws in Japan, whilst they're different, provide a similar level of protection to what you see in Europe. The Asia Pac region, they now have a regime to swap data internationally. So it is different everywhere, yes. Generally, if you're complying with GDPR, you're going to comply with legislation in other countries because GDPR sets the gold standard. But there is still a caveat that there are additional extra things you can and can't do in various countries. So you can't just think, oh, I comply with GDPR, therefore I'm fine to roll out globally and will be compliant in every other country. One of the biggest flags is data localization rules. So in places like China and Russia, it is very, very difficult to take data, personal data, out of those countries in your supply chain. They want it to remain in the country. So if you had an established supply chain across Europe and the Americas, say, you'd struggle to simply just go into those markets without fundamentally changing your supply chain.
Right, excellent. So do your research by the sounds of it. Excellent. Right, so Colin Jackson asked a question. Who owns any data that is gathered, and what is the incentive for companies to make this data portable to other platforms, and how would that be enforced?
Okay, so let's just be clear what we mean by own the data, because I think people take very different meanings from that. From a legal point of view, nobody owns data in the same way that you own your car or your house or a company owns its assets. People have different rights over data and control it. So if we're just talking about a privacy context, it is the data controller. So that's the person who decides what data needs to be used and what they're going to use it for. They are the party that are on the hook for the vast majority of GDPR compliance. So they're the party that's responsible for making sure that data is used in a compliant way and doing the things I talked about, the DPIA, issuing a privacy notice, deciding what data is collected, auditing supply chains, etc. Just because they're the data controller doesn't mean once they have that data, they can do whatever they want with it. That's the whole point of the GDPR. You need to tell people, this is what I'm going to do with your data. And if you want to do something different, you have to go back to and say, now I'm going to do this. And you can only process personal data if you satisfy the grounds that are set out in the legislation. So that's why working out what you're processing it for is really important, to know which of those grounds you fall under. Going into the details of those is sort of a whole separate talk, but you need to fit within that framework. So that goes some way to answering the question, because you don't own it in a legal sense. You control it. You have obligations to protect it. You get certain rights to do things with it through the ground you're using it for under GDPR and what you've told people you're going to do with it. But it doesn't mean you can just then go off and give it to another organisation, unless that is linked to the purpose for which you're processing it. In terms of making it portable, it's a right that individuals have under GDPR. So if you are the data controller, you have to make sure that you can enable someone to port data. There isn't an incentive in terms of a financial incentive, or you might decide to use it as a selling point for your particular product, because you do, if you think about the banking industry, there's been the open banking API. The whole point of that regulation was to require banks to open up, to let other suppliers come into that supply chain, to say, I can create a single view where me as an individual, Jocelyn Pauley, I can see all my bank accounts in one go rather than having to log on to each of them separately. The regulators hoped that introducing this right to data portability might do the same in the data protection market, which you can't really think of as one market because you use data protection in so many different ways. But they hoped that that would encourage organisations to think about connecting with others in their market and how they might facilitate the movement of personal data if that's what the individual wanted to do with their data.
Excellent, thank you very much. Really good stuff. I mean, clearly a very important and massive area for companies to look at and consider. So a lot of work to be done. And as with all the presentations, we will be sharing your slides, and we'll also be sharing your contact details with everybody. So if they do want to follow up, they can do that. But thank you very much for that. Much appreciated, and thank you for taking time out of your holiday to be with us today. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Right, so we'll then move on to our next speaker. And that's Neil Levitt from Clearview Intelligence. Now, Neil wasn't actually able to join us on the day, but in theory, we can now run a video of his recorded presentation. So let's see how that goes. There we are. I trust that everybody can see that.
Hello, my name's Neil Levitt. Thank you for the invitation to join you here today at the Silverstone Technology Cluster. I'm with Clearview Intelligence. I'm one of our business development consultants here. I'm really sorry I can't be with you there in person today, as I'm unfortunately engaged in some other business activities this week. But we desperately wanted to share our experiences with you, what we've been involved with over the last 15 months or so. And unfortunately, Pim, the organizer here, has enabled us to record the video for you and share it with you in advance. So hopefully you get the same experience as if I'm there in person, and I'll be delighted to take some questions from everybody who's in the audience after the event. So for us to confirm what we've actually been involved with, we've been using wearable technology in social distancing instances in the realm recently of the pandemic that's been going on, and also going to be explaining to you as well how the technology will be used for people-client interface solutions after the use case here. The theory behind the whole system is that each wearer of a device will be in their own theoretical virtual bubble, which is predetermined to a distance proximity that it will be working on. For the social distancing solution that we have at the moment, we're using a technology which is called ultra wideband, which is very specifically defined in terms of the distance that we can achieve with it down to the centimetre. And for social distancing, that's obviously imperative. As each person in each of the bubbles starts to come together, as you can see there, we've got a crossover area in the middle of the image on the screen. That alerts both of the wearers that they've now breached the distance that these systems have been set to. They've had their alert, and it's now incumbent on them to move away and keep themselves at a safe distance. If they don't, then they will continue to receive a physical vibration on their wearable device, or excuse me, additionally, they'll also be having an audible device, audio warning as well, that's going to be playing out to them like a buzzing sound to let them know that they've breached the distance that they should be within. At this point, the tags will also be monitoring the time and date that the incident took place for, and also the length of time that the interaction occurred for as well, because obviously different places around the world have got different guidelines on how long you can be close to each other, whether it's indoors, whether it's outdoors, and all of this type of statistical information will be able to help the track and trace system should anybody who's on the particular site that the equipment's being worn on be found to have symptoms of COVID at a later date. We actually partnered for the technology with an organisation who are based in the UK themselves. They're a company called Localization. We've got a very exceptionally good working relationship with them. Their technology, excuse me, is held in 3 separate devices that you can wear. You have a watch for heavy industrial incidents, and this is for obviously when people are out in the field, want to make sure they can feel the vibration on them. They're in a busy environment, could be noisy, so they'll get the vibration on their wrist for them. Second to that, they have a buzzer, which would act as a clip on the back, so it could go on a belt loop, a safety hat harness. It could go on a jacket or something along those lines. And the third solution is a lanyard wearable card that would hang around your neck. Same technology again, all 3 of them using the ultra wideband sensors. And what we've got there is just 3 different forms of wearing the device for depending on where the use case is. One of the first contracts that we picked up in the realm of social distancing was actually with ITV. Excuse me, back in the summer of last year, we managed to get our technology onto I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here up at Grewick Castle. It was one of the fundamental reasons that they were able to, along with a lot of other social distancing protocols that they had in place, but the fact that they could demonstrate they had a localized electronic and digital and accurate track and trace system for people that had come into contact with each other meant they were able to get the show away in a specific high and deep lockdown that was going on in North Wales at the time. So that was a great success for us. Subsequent to that, we then went on to do quite a lot of work in the TV field. So we worked on shows like The Only Way is Essex, Celebs Go Dating, The Voice, Ant and Dec's Saturday Night Takeaway, and Dancing on Ice. And for ITV Sport, we've covered Cheltenham. We've helped with the England home internationals that were at Wembley football this season. And we also did all of England's Six Nations home matches as well for ITV Sport. So we've got a very, very close working relationship with ITV Sport. And we were delighted to be brought in as a preferred supplier for ITV on this technology. It's a departure from what Clearview themselves normally do, is we usually work in the realms of traffic technology and traffic safety monitoring and management on the highway network. My background myself was that I owned a magazine called Highways for over 20 years, and I've known the guys at Clearview, guys and girls, sorry, at Clearview for a long while. And when I started to pick up a lot of these ITV contracts, I took the opportunity to Clearview and I needed their support in terms of maintenance and in terms of tracking and accounting and support and technical support. So it's been a great partnership for us as we've moved the business on to where we are now. As I said, the technology itself is based on ultra wideband, and we look at how the bubbles actually integrate and how that can make sure that we've got the localized track and trace system. But going back into a highways environment that Clearview have always worked in, we have always seen that the operatives that we put out on the highway network are at danger every day. They're in a risky environment. Construction is one of the most dangerous environments there is to work in the UK. And the people that are operating the actual work zones that they're in, it's the only area of life that they can control for the safety of the operatives that are out on the network. We do have elements of road worker abuse where we get articles and items thrown at the operatives as people going by in their vehicles. We also have crashes and accidents where drivers not paying attention sometimes are speeding, fell asleep, there's an accident in front of them, they veer into the roadworks and this can cause problems. But the one area that the contractors can actually control is to make sure that when their operatives go on site, the plant and equipment that's around them, they're as safe as possible. As you can see here, Highways England site, Highways England are the government-owned agency who manage all of the motorways and major A roads around the country. In their northeast area, for example, they've got 3,000 workers per day on average that are operating on the network in any one day. And recently on the A19, they had some major works going on, and they had 200 drivers mistakenly driven onto that construction site. So for those of you that are aware of health and safety legislation, that's 200 near misses. DHL, for example, for any near miss incident, to get it all the way through from reporting to the whole of the investigation to an outcome, it's about 360 pieces of paper. So you can imagine the amount of work that was required there for 200 near misses. And that's on Highways England's one construction site in the northeast of England. It gives you an idea of how big the problem is in the UK. Increasingly, because of this and because of greater awareness of the mental and physical well-being and health and rights that workers have to go to work and be expected to come home safely from work without being injured whilst doing their work, we're seeing a lot more corporate social responsibility being demonstrated by the major contractors. And this is now coming through in actually not just being there from the point of view as it's about a byproduct of a human relations exercise. This is actually something where people are reporting on it in their annual reports. It's the criteria for bids that people are actually now being asked to demonstrate their health and safety record and what mitigations they're having in place. And it's also part of tenders now as well, so that people are asking them, you know, you'll get performance benefits and bonuses for the contractor on how safe their sites are. You can see on this slide here that we've actually got an operative who's going about their daily work. They're not on one of the big major Highways England schemes. This is a utilities contract from a stock photograph that we picked up. And you can see that the operative is working in close proximity to the piece of plant and machinery. Well, that is the potential to be a near miss. In some instances, you do have to be very close to where the plant and machinery is working. You could be a reversing banksman. In this instance, they could be looking at a potential cable or a potential utility that needs to be manipulated by the plant operator. And so the human operative needs to be close by. But what we're looking to do there is we're looking to train the technology of the system that we're bringing in to know that if somebody is at the front right of the vehicle, that has been risk assessed as part of the performance of that particular task. If the person was to stand to the left, that isn't part of the risk assessment, so the alert would come up. We took a very conservative estimate. There's about 50,000 pieces of plant and equipment deployed at any one time around the UK that could be deemed a potential hazard on the highway network. As I said, that's a very conservative estimate, but that's 50,000 potential incidents on top of the 200 people that were just driving onto the site anyway that really shouldn't have been there, any day, at any time for people that are actually working on our roads and highway network. To give you an indication of the type of plant and equipment that we're talking about here, you can see that a lot of this is heavy machinery. And I don't know of any particular person other than Superman that might come off second best against that array of equipment there. That's not an exhaustive list, and some of it, the equipment that's even bigger. But these are the standard types of machinery you'd expect to see out on the network. And so if I knew that there was technology there that would remind me on a busy, noisy construction environment that one of these was approaching me, and it gave me the opportunity to be aware of it, to take remedial action, I'd certainly be grateful to be wearing it from my employer. So how does the technology work? Well, I'm just going to show you here visually. It works on a basis of ever decreasing in circles or ever increasing circles. If we take from the left-hand side the monitor that you can see there, that's the in-cab display system, which is alerting the driver of the piece of machinery that coming from the right-hand sensor, you can see a yellow quadrant has lit up, and we know that there's somebody coming into contact with us potentially. And that sensor you can see is the middle yellow box there. There's three of them set out on this particular forklift truck there. We've got two at the front and one at the rear, and it's the front right one that's alerted. So the driver is now aware that this is a potential incident for somebody approaching me. And then also you can see to the far right, we've got the operative who's in their little bubble, but they've also got their own safety tag on. In this instance, it's attached to the back of his hard hat. and it's going to be vibrating and buzzing and saying to him, "You're getting too close to a piece of machinery, you need to take some action." So we're mitigating both parts there. At no point are we saying to anybody, this technology will take over and keep you safe. The responsibility of personal health, safety, well-being of themselves and their colleagues remains vested with the actual people that are going on site themselves. What we are saying is the technology is there to act as a technology reminder, a big brother for want of a better phrase, that if you get caught up in the activities of what you're there to do, or you're distracted by something else going on site, then you will actually then hopefully get the response from the technology to say, "Oh, last reminder, take some action." As you can see, the idea of the vehicle, we spoke earlier on about the virtual bubble of the operative, the person who's out on foot. But from a high view here, you can actually see that what we're looking to demonstrate here is a virtual halo effect around the vehicle, so that we can say any time in 360 degrees, there's a potential of an incident coming from behind us, to the side of us, in front of us. When that happens, the system, if we have the 4G GPS based module that sits in the central processor in the actual cab of the vehicle, it can send an immediate alert which will go out by email to the operative of the actual, the operator of the actual piece of machinery, the operative who is on foot, the site manager, the health and safety team, and it's then going to report a near miss incident in real time of where it happened, what time, what vehicle was involved, and what person was involved. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to remove people from frontline danger wherever possible. It's one of the key targets of Highways England, that they're even talking about having a completely automated construction and maintenance site at some point in the future. I can't see that happening for quite a while yet. It's a great ambition to have, and you reach for the stars. That's what you need to do from a health and safety perspective. But we certainly hope that whilst the creation of all of these further technologies come on board, this can play a key part in keeping the people that do have to be on site as safe as possible. So, as I said, we're looking to use this as not a way of actually absolving anybody of their health and safety obligations while they're on site. We're calling it an active safety measure. So people say, well, what's an active safety measure? Great observation here in this photograph. You can see two pieces of passive safety that this particular person in this photograph with their back to us is actually engaged in here. The first is their hard hat, and the second is their high visibility jacket. These are two passive safety measures that they've got on. They only become active if called upon, so that the hard hat will become active if something hit the guy on the head, or the high visibility jacket obviously becomes active when anybody's looking around for any potential visual danger out on the site. Active safety in this particular instance is that the buzzer on the guy's head is on, and it's always looking to communicate with a sensor. So it's actively scanning to try to keep the wearer of it safe. And that's the difference between passive safety and active safety in this particular instance. As you can see on a big piece of plant and machinery, we looked earlier on at the small forklift truck, but here you see it on something that's more akin to what we'd see on a highway site or a construction site. You can see on the front right by the grille of the vehicle there, two of our safety sensors that are looking for tags at any particular point. They're at the back, so if the guy starts to reverse, they'll get picked up. And it's highly likely that on the front there'll be a bucket that the guy is actually picking up some earthworks with, and there'll be something on the front there as well for them to be picking up any particular pedestrians out there. There's no restriction on where they can go to ensure total safety. If you look to the very top of this particular picture here, you'll see one out on the reach boom arm as well as two sticking out of the top of the cab as well. And there'll be a further one on the rear. So we are looking to make sure that the whole of this vehicle, not just the halo of the cab, but the whole of the working environment of the vehicle is providing safety at all times. We saw earlier on the image of the cab in-cab display. So here is it in its real life environment rather than just a nice Photoshop picture. You can see that on this particular instance, there's obviously something that's coming up on the front left here, because it's the front left sensor that has gone yellow, and there's something at the back as well, because they've both gone yellow, and we've got a red stop sign all the way around it to say this person is now in the danger zone. The system hasn't picked them up just to say something's approaching. It's saying something's in the danger zone. Until you're confident that that's clear, then proceed back to work again. So as you can see there, from the photoshopped image, it's telling us exactly where the person is. It's the front right sensor on this instance. One thing to note, and people ask about people to plant safety, can we do plant to plant safety? Is yes, we can. It works on exactly the same methodology as the rest of the system, but to demonstrate to the operator of the plant and machinery the difference, instead of having a yellow quadrant, a yellow pie chart, pie pieces shown up there, there'll be white instead. And as people obviously start to use the system, it'll become instantly recognisable. Well, that's a piece of machinery, or that particular instance is a person. You can see here that the kit is highly interchangeable. We needed a demonstration model when we first brought the kit in to work with, and we put it on a child's toy just to prove the fact, and we could take it to do demonstrations in companies' offices, that we had 3 sensors actually set up on this. We had the display unit as well. We had it fully powered by a car battery, and we were able to push the child's toy around, and we had people holding the pedestrian tags, walking closely to us, and then the system would alert. So just to demonstrate the true dexterity and versatility of the actual equipment itself, we then took this to a client for a trial that we're in the process of doing at the moment, and we took the exact same kit off of that toy set we had there, and we installed it on a huge piece of plant that's now undertaking daily trials for the client up in Hull. So it wasn't just a case of a theoretical demonstration of the kit working with child's toy. It's the same kit, the same components put onto the big plant and machinery. Once the system starts working, and here's what we'll start to report back to our clients as part of the trial, which we'll be able to give them granular detail of the site safety that's going on in and around them. We'll be able to show them the number of incidents per tag. So it could be per operator of a piece of machinery, or it could be per operative, who is obviously the pedestrian. So we can see if there's any one particular person or group of people that are working unsafely, and we can bring them in and we can have the discussion about that. We also have how many near misses there are per day. So it would accumulate everything and syndicate all of the reporting from a particular site and let us know how many there are in a given period even. If we've got the geolocation system particularly put together, then we're in a position to start offering people heat maps. We're in a position to start showing exactly where a particular incident's occurred. It could be, for example, that there are pieces of plant that are coming very close to pedestrians and we're getting an alert, but it could be that they're behind a physical safety barrier, and it just so happens to be that that's where the area is where they're queuing to get into the canteen, for example. But as long as we're aware of that and it's part of our risk mitigation, then we can start to make sure that we're logging that accordingly, and we can discount that when we start to do any information gathering at a later stage. It also helps us to factor in planning of sites as well, so that it could be that something's showing up that we hadn't considered could be a problem, and then we can put risk interventions in place as well. The one thing that we are doing though is we're taking out the level of human perception when it comes to reporting near misses. Perception, interpretation, any other word that you'd like to use where we're saying that looked dangerous, we should report that. If set against the calibration of the system, if we put it in, we don't have to worry about that. The system will pick it up. We're not saying that any unsafe practices that get spotted shouldn't be reported, but what we're saying is that we're taking away that human aspect of, you know, there could be some confrontation on site. There could be people thinking that they're being victimized. There could be people that fear for their jobs. They could be in fear of reprisals if they do actually report something. It can be quite, you know, quite a daunting task to physically ask somebody to have to go and report something. A lot of these near misses go unreported because people get back to the office after their shift. It requires a lengthy filling in of paperwork to gather the evidence. It's a chore. It's a job nobody really wants to do. And so with technologically intervening and the system making the report for you and then prompting you to give your input on how the incident occurred, we're more likely and highly more likely, almost guaranteed, to get a truly statistically correct understanding of how many near misses are going on at any one site. Because as I said, at the moment, I don't think many of the incidents are getting reported. And that's borne fruit out of the conversations that I've had with contractors who are saying that they either get not accurate or not precise data. They either get accurate data, but it's not precise, or it's precise, but it's not accurate. We're trying to give them absolutely that bullseye shot on everything. But we knew it occurred. It's been reported who was involved in it. We know what day it happened, and it's now for the people involved in that particular incident to help us understand what happened and why it happened and what action we need to take as a result of it. What we're actually hoping to see with this system is not just catch people doing things wrong. We're looking to try to achieve behavioural change so that we can actually understand in the first instance when a system goes in, we're expecting high volumes of incidents keep going off. Then we can put in risk interventions that can mitigate certain circumstances. People become far more aware of actually how far 2 meters is. I'm sure we all had it ourselves when social distancing came along, and we saw it when we were putting in the social distancing at I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. People were questioning, is that really 2 meters? My goodness. You know, I think your system must be calibrated wrong, but people's perceptions themselves, you know, and you get over familiar with certain circumstances. And so to try to effect behavioural change with the aid of technology, whilst not taking away the responsibility of the people on site for their own health and safety, should see safer working practices in the future. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what we've been doing here at Clearview Intelligence. Originally, as I said, it was a social distancing project that we were involved with at Grewick Castle for I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. We've gone on to have some fantastic success with ITV that we're very proud to help them with keeping their shows on our screens and keeping us entertained while we were all going through some very dark moments. And we look forward to bringing this technology now into a wider used environment to try and keep the many people that are out there keeping our road network maintained, cleaned, safe. Let's try and get them home as safely as possible as well. So my name's Neil Levitt. Been an absolute pleasure to have virtually joined you here today. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, and I very much look forward to responding to your questions as they come through. So thanks ever so much, and take care. Goodbye.
Excellent. Fascinating presentation, that, and it's a great shame obviously that Neil isn't here. We will be sharing Neil's details with you, so you can follow up with him and ask questions in person. There's 1 or 2 questions that have come through. I think the comment on the private aircraft and the gliders, I think, is very valid. Be interesting to see if we can apply to that, and presumably it can. The neutral zones, I genuinely don't know. You know, potentially, I think that might be an option, but that's the sort of question that I think you need to go to Neil with. I mean, personally, I would love to see or love to know whether it's possible to invert it as well. So if you have, you know, maybe a particularly boisterous child or something, that you could fit them with one of the devices, get them to wear one of the devices, I suppose, and see that they don't get away from you for more than X amount of meters or whatever it might be. That could be an interesting thing as well. But I think the thing to do there is to get in touch with Neil when we send you the follow-up email and provide you with the details and get in touch with him in that sort of way. So we're kind of slightly running behind schedule, but we'll make up some of the time in the break now, because we've got a networking break scheduled. So what I'll do is I'll put you all back into the social lounge. Please take the opportunity to network and join the table and meet some of your fellow attendees and maybe talk about some of the things that you've discussed. So we'll be back here at 11:30, which is in about 16 minutes from now, where we'll come back with a presentation from Dr. Duncan Banks, which is going to be about wearable and implantable devices, which I think is going to be fascinating. And then last but certainly not least, we'll also have Simon McMaster joining us, talking about the work that they've been doing, where actually they've managed to make the textile the sensor as well. And that sounds incredibly sci-fi to me, so I can't wait to hear that presentation. So please join us again in about 15 minutes. But in the meantime, please take the opportunity to network and meet your fellow attendees. So we'll see you in about 15 minutes. Thank you. So as advertised, we'll now have Dr. Duncan Banks talk to us about wearable and implantable devices. Duncan, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'd like to thank Silverstone Technology Group, and in particular Pim, for inviting me to this event. And I also thought that the three previous speakers have done a marvellous job at talking about their particular areas. So before I start, I'll give you a little bit of a background about me. I gained a degree in medical physiology in 1977 and a PhD in neuroscience and anaesthetics in 1982. Although I've been involved in starting businesses and charities, I've been a long time member of involvement in medical innovation and fundamental science. So I like to discover new things about the body and how it works, and also in particular when things go wrong. Therefore, at heart, I'm an academic. So my present appointment is as head of scholarship at the School of Life, Health and Chemical Sciences at the Open University, and I'll just go through a couple of slides that shows me how I've got to where I am. So projects that form the basis of development of wearable technologies. 1971, I produced a very early version of wearable technology for the elderly and infirm. You've no doubt noticed that I've been involved in this for a long time. That's more than 50 years now. I can remember as a precocious 15-year-old going cap in hand to AEG Telefunken's head office in London to ask for developmental money for an idea I had for an early version of a wearable device for the old and infirm. The device could function as an automated alarm system to summon aid if someone fell, was immobile or needed urgent attention. It integrated neatly with a telephone system and was programmed to call for help if it was required. The device is now in a box in my garage, along with a manual I wrote to accompany it. Alas, I was too young to patent it. At the time it was completed, I was almost 17, and this all happened quite a long time. So that was my first mistake, is having a good idea and not being able to implement it or exploit it. Then followed a design of equipment to record muscle and nerve activity in humans and animals, and this also involved in miniaturization of clinical testing equipment for use in GP and veterinary practice. So followed by in mid-1980s, implantable devices for the treatment of Parkinson's disease. This essentially is a deep brain stimulation technique in areas of the brain which are controlling tremor. And we did some of the very first surgeries when I was working at the neurosurgical unit in Smethwick in the West Midlands, and we performed the early trials of a device that totally reversed Parkinson's disease. The preliminary trials in those days were very successful. I then went on to be interested in microprocessors, assessment of skin and tooth viability using proximity laser probes, surgical robots. When I was at the National University of Singapore, I was part of a group looking at assessment of the Da Vinci surgical system. And in 2010, I established a wearable technology interest as a research theme at the OU. And then I'll talk about this in greater detail, my involvement in the design and assessment of one of the first commercially available wrist-worn ECG monitors. Also had smart devices featured on the TV series An Hour to Save Your Life on BBC Two. Okay, so also in the late, well, a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, I had various projects looking at the utility of smartwatches for the elderly. And then Smart Skin project to encourage regrowth of traumatized skin, and the use of AI in predicting cardiac events. And this was in collaboration with cardiologists at Milton Keynes University Hospital. The outcome from this project has now been published, and we are expecting to launch this across the NHS. This could save the NHS quite a lot of money. And then we have been developing a smart bed project that is used for preventing pressure ulcers and monitoring bed occupancy, again with Milton Keynes University Hospital. I can't give you many more details of this because the trial is still ongoing. But if anyone listening who would like to take part in the project or interested in bringing this to market, I would be interested in connecting onto you. We've got the proof of concept stage, at least our ideas work. And well, last year was a series of publication on apps that support smart technologies, including ECG monitors and fertility. The fertility app coincided with COVID. Interestingly, had quite a large interest from the media. The use last year of a project of use of predictive analytics in the pre-symptomatic phase of COVID using wearable technologies. And then recently in the design of ear-worn EEG, that's an electroencephalogram, electrocardiogram, and PPG, position sense for monitoring and treatment of a variety of medical conditions. So the most recent one is the use of wearable technologies and epigenetics to investigate long COVID. This is a real problem at the moment, and this is ongoing. And we're about to put in a grant application. It's also cross-discipline, so people from across the university are involved in this, and also the local hospital. And finally, NIHR grant to look at the use of wearable devices in clinical environments in East Africa. So let's go through those three that I highlighted earlier. Involvement in the design and access assessment of one of the first commercially available wrist-worn ECG monitors. Various projects looking at the utility of smartwatches for the elderly. And there's quite a big variety of smart watches available. And the use of predictive analytics in the pre-symptomatic phase of COVID. So let's look at the first one. This is a wristband with built-in ECG sensor of a medical grade accuracy. This is a medical device. This was came to market in 2016, but it proceeded with about a year and or 18 months of developmental time. It's used by people with symptoms that may suggest cardiac conduction abnormalities. So if you press the ECG sensor for 30 seconds, your heart rate measurement is recorded and up to 30 ECG files are stored in an internal memory. And this is what it looks like. The data is acquired through two sensors, one here, number 2, and number 5. Number 5 would be, say, on your left wrist, and then you put your finger from your right wrist onto number 2, and the device senses that it's made a connection and it starts recording an ECG. This would be the equivalent of lead 1 of a traditional ECG machine. So this data is then transferred to a mobile device and then can be studied by healthcare professionals. And it was meant to replace the traditional Holter ECG device. So it can also function as an activity tracker, measure steps, sleep, calories burnt, and the battery life was about 10 days, and it took about 1.5 hours to charge. Unfortunately, the recommended price was quite high, almost £500. It's no longer available. I suppose you could buy it, but what the main problem with this now is the apps that are associated with it are not compatible with the most recent operating systems. We then looked at comparing this recently with a number of other ECG devices and produced this paper to compare a variety of these mobile self-monitoring ECG devices to diagnose arrhythmias those in particular causing patients problems are those associated with palpitations. So various projects looking at the utility of smartwatches for the elderly. This was a very interesting project. It was involving quite a lot of partners, MyoCare, Samsung, Active Insights, Sentimoto, Carers MK, Milton Keynes Council, University of Oxford, and Milton Keynes Age UK. And you had a series of grants, two of them shown here. One is from the Sir Haley Stewart Trust, and the other was from the Economic and Social Research Council, which is part of UKRI. Now, these two graphics were drawn by an artist during one of the sessions we were holding at Impact Acceleration Awards ceremony in Oxford. And on the left, you can see that the purpose, the objectives of these activity monitors for the elderly were to encourage healthy aging, to alleviate isolation, to enable patients to self-monitor and manage, and to enable carers to monitor patient health. And you can see on the right-hand side, we have the project team, universities, communities, charities, manufacturers, healthcare professionals, and end users. In fact, one of the major outcomes from the manufacturer Samsung was to raise awareness, educating potential users about health wearables and the benefit of active aging, to also change policies and practices, increase willingness to engage with new collaborations, initiatives to train healthcare professionals to adopt wearable devices, and have a positive role of activity monitors in fighting aging and loneliness. So the major sponsor for this was Samsung, and they used the data to create activity apps that were more suited for the older generations. As you probably realize, with Fitbit adverts and Apple Watch adverts, they all seem to target a young, fit and healthy population and not the elderly. So the types of activities and how these were stored and fed back to the individuals should change with someone's age, and Samsung has apps specifically for the elderly population now. Now, the last one of these is the use of predictive analytics in the pre-symptomatic phase of COVID. A very interesting project. Really came about because of COVID last year. We had no intention of doing anything quite like this. And we had a variety of collaborators on this. This was a UKRI Innovate UK funded project. The SME was Mindspire, and a number of different people from clinicians, Mindspire, Professor Richard Gervitz from the USA, and also David Mayer from the University of Hertfordshire were involved in this. So the project aimed to demonstrate the potential for heart rate variability to form part of an early warning system of COVID infection that could be co-designed to integrate with the NHS National Early Warning Score in primary care. So there have been examples of citizen involvement in healthcare. One of those is the home-based spirometry to support people living with cystic fibrosis. So we also have probably 4 to 5 million people taking part in Professor Tim Spector's project looking at COVID, also vaccination, and so on. And I think this should actually have been quite a successful project, and I'll see how we developed in the next few slides. So we had three work packages. Firstly was the assessment of phone-based HRV measurement against gold standard medical grade device, and this started in June 20. And we really wanted to look at whether we could have a phone-based applications which could be deployed to capture heart rate and heart rate variability, working with the NHS approved devices. Secondly was rapid review of HRV as a biomarker for infection identification. And thirdly, the work package was titled Proof of Concept, Longitudinal HRV Data Tracking with 30 individuals. So that we wanted to deploy tracking devices to a small cohort to demonstrate changes in HRV and other physiological signs, if not in response to COVID, which at the time was actually, we started this in June, the number of COVID cases was actually quite low. It could also be used, for example, in other respiratory conditions like flu. So what was the innovation? Well, the innovation in this project lies in the easy to obtain biomarkers of stress on the body. So these biomarkers are shown to change as the body responds to infection, creating an opportunity for an early warning system. A rise in resting heart rate often accompanies infection, but an even earlier indicator is a change in heart rate variability. And these changes are the body's first line of defense to restore cardiac balance, and is under direct control of the autonomic nervous system. And thirdly, heart rate variability was first used in the 1960s to track astronaut performance. So it's now become a measurement which is well studied and used to measure stress levels, immune status, and predict the speed of recovery after illness, making it a valuable tool for tracking in COVID. So what is the market for the outcomes of this project? Well, a COVID early warning app, if phone-based HRV demonstrates quality versus clinical standard devices, a low cost option presents for global rollout of an early warning system for infection. Secondly, an integrated COVID warning, early warning system using fitness trackers integrated into the NHS digital symptom tracker, and a monitoring tool for recovery from infection. In addition to detecting the point of infection, monitoring of heart rate and heart rate variability and other physiological patterns will help clinicians to monitor recovery from those patients hospitalized and alert any deterioration. It's also clear that some of the recovery period lasts quite a long time. In June, when we started this project, we hadn't appreciated the problems associated with long COVID, but part of this study is going to look at long COVID in the future. So let me just show you what we do to analyze the results. Here is a typical ECG at the top left and a PPG, photoplethysmography device. And what we're actually interested in is the gap between these peaks, the interbeat interval. So you can look at two domains. There's a time domain, which actually is how many beats there are in a period. This is your heart rate. And then there's a frequency domain, which is looking at how these RR intervals are modulated. So you can see here, small on the left, small gaps, and on the right-hand side, large gaps. So how we eventually look at this is a derivative of the RR interval called RMSSD, root mean square standard deviation, or the interbeat interval. So the hardware comparison we made was looking at a variety of different smartwatches, and our medical grade device was a Nexus 10. And you can see on the right hand side here in blue, it can measure respiration, ECG, temperature, electrodermal activity, and or some people say galvanic skin response, and also PPG, which is photoplethysmography. So this is a light based sensor that all wearable devices that are smart watches use to measure heart rate. And you can see also we used a phone-based PPG device, and so we're also looking at recording using a Keto ear clip and the software HRV for training here on the right hand side. So what we're doing is to simultaneously record all the parameters using different devices, then make a comparison between how good these devices were compared to each other. So we thought that the Nexus electrocardiogram and plethysmography interbeat interval was processed and the artifacts removed using QBS software. I'm not going to talk about anything more about that. The Keto, camera, HRV, and Garmin, in this case Garmin Vivo Active 4 watch, recorded the test HRV apps, all generated their own summary HRV statistics, and we were able to compare this to the Nexus at the top. The keto and the camera HRV both gave raw IBI data, and we've computed some descriptive statistics on these data in MATLAB, and we've processed using software which removes digital artifacts. So this is the scatter plot of, on the left-hand side, the nexus, the PPG against the ECG here on the horizontal axis against PPG, and as you can see, a perfect line with all the points on the line. And this is clinical grade, suggesting that you can use either PPG or ECG to measure interval. When you're looking at the Nexus ECG against the CardioMood app, you get much more deviation, and you can also see it's the line going from 0 to 1 or 0.1 isn't the same as the previous one, and the same with CardioMood raw data. I won't mention this, but when we looked at the camera HRV against the Nexus ECG, we found that the camera devices that were measuring heart rate variability were incredibly inaccurate. And you can see not only the range was really poor and the scatter was huge. So we concluded that the watch or test HRV apps do not give us an accurate data. The camera HRV data was poor, and we need to know how to get good data. So the good news is that the Keto and the CardioMood app was getting good enough accurate data to make it usable. So we were looking at a rapid review of HRV as a biomarker in infection identification. And we were looking at obtaining data where people were using the wearable technologies during COVID, either people who had in an environment where they're likely to have COVID, or people who are just generally quantitative self-type people, just measuring everything about what their body was doing. And this company, Welltory, is an app which is associated with a number of wearable devices, and essentially it's looking at deep heart monitoring. And the terms and conditions of this company said that they could store the data anonymously and then make the data available for researchers, and that is precisely what we're able to do. So you only had to have a good reason to ask for the data, and we got it. Actually, there's no publications on this data, so we were quite pleased at that point. So the Welltory COVID data notes, can HRV be used to detect COVID infection before any symptoms are detected? And the idea was so people can quarantine earlier and therefore reduce infection rates. Our hypothesis was that HRV decreases 3 to 5 days before the onset of COVID symptoms. Heart rate will increase 3 to 5 days before the onset of COVID symptoms. And therefore we were able to look at time bins, phases of being ill or contracted the virus. And also we were looking at how much data do you need to detect any noticeable differences between people who were well, pre-COVID symptoms, pre-symptomatic, and during COVID. And this is what we looked at from the data. We looked at 14 days before contracting COVID. The ill phase is phase 3. The contracted COVID was phase 2. Anything up to 14 days before actually the first signs and symptoms of COVID. We had to define a recovery phase and then a post-COVID phase after 28 days. And here we have it graphically displayed at the bottom. Time before symptoms definitely do not have COVID. Minimum time before COVID symptoms, and then therefore must already have COVID, and so on. And what we're trying to avoid is to avoid this cascade up to hospitalization and ICU by catching an infection very early. And this is the data. We went through all the data that was supplied by Welltory, and there wasn't an awful lot. To be quite honest, I was very disappointed. So we had a statistical analysis of all the data sets that were provided, and we were not at all impressed with what was available. It would appear that smartwatches are not very good at measuring HRV, but we weren't to know that at the time. So you can see here, we essentially was looking at, can this contracted state give us any information that's statistically different to the COVID state, the recovery state, or the post-recovery state? And the answer is no, because you can see that here there's quite a large range of data. So we've not disproved our hypothesis that HRV can spot COVID. What is sad is that we've had 3,000 observations from a data set, but only a few subjects with sufficient data to do meaningful analysis. So this is the real world. This is as it is. These were not controlled experiments. So why could we couldn't really predict anything else. So conclusions from the Wearable data set were that we thought was going to be a fantastic opportunity to provide additional data to support our hypothesis. Turned out not to be true. The data was extremely messy with a high degree of variability amongst subjects. We have not disproved our hypothesis. It's just the data supplied by Wearable was insufficient, and the Wearable data was not supported by reliable COVID positive tests, and so on. So we then looked at work package 3, titled Proof of Concept. We looked at longitudinal HRV data with our own 30 individuals, which are highly controlled, systematic, scientific study, which also includes a data analysis. So unfortunately for you, the results of this current study have not been analysed fully. However, one of the first problems we encountered was a huge amount of data that we had to analyse. The data supplied by the individuals were anonymised because no one gave their name, although the name, when they registered, their name and anonymised coding was kept in a separate file and not accessible to the study group. So the large amounts of data necessitated producing programs to analyse the data and automatically process it. And the software package, including all the routines, is available for download. So at least there's been one positive outcome from this particular group of data, and that is this paper here, which was published about 3 weeks ago. It's an open access MATLAB graphical user interface, a GUI, for analysis of complexity and entropy in physiological signals. We'll take any sort of signal and produce and analyze it in a meaningful way, and you can download it. It's free of charge. And if you go to the URL at the bottom, you'll see that this paper, it's an open access, and it also has all the routines, all the code. You can download the software free of charge from GitHub. So why am I interested in being here? Well, I have to work with a large number of clever academics. So if you want to collaborate with us, you have a large number of people who are very interested in doing this sort of work. We have a small scale fabrication and 3D manufacturing facilities. We have a simulated hospital environment. We have access to patients both in the UK and abroad. We have lots of government and charity grants and also access to entrepreneurial money. However, we do need help. We need help with commercial and developmental expertise from UK or EU-based companies, and also companies that are in the same sort of field of research as us in smart wearable healthcare device solutions, and also companies that are used to medical device legislation, because we certainly are not. That's the end of it.
Excellent, thank you very much, Duncan. Very interesting and a lot there. I think especially the last bit where there's a real sort of call to action for some of our members to engage with the Open University, I think is very very valuable. And obviously, you know, again, as per usual with the other speakers, we'll share your details with everybody if they want to follow up afterwards. But I'm also aware that Julia Friar is at the event here as well, and she's one of the people at the OU to engage with industry as well. So if you have an opportunity to to chat with her in the networking thing, then please do so. We've had one question come in, so let me have a look at that. It's a question from Bobby Lawrenson. In your opinion, if the shackles of typical electrical device restraints were removed, e.g. fixed circuitry, what would an improved version of monitor/devices look like?
Yeah. Okay.
And how much more powerful and accurate can they be?
Okay, so the majority of smart watches are smart in that they do most of the processing on the device, and what they give you is a minimum amount of data. It's already processed. Okay, number of steps. It doesn't actually give you anything in terms of detail. So, for example, those devices that are measuring heart rate over time maybe are taking 10-second snippets of that information, storing it, and then averaging it over time. Actually, that's not particularly useful for researchers. What we actually need is a device which is able to do fast HD conversion and give us a large amount of raw data, which is then fed in via Bluetooth to another device, which is much more powerful. I think we've reached the limit of what we can do with these devices. However, there are on the horizon some very interesting devices coming on, which will be able to do quite a lot more. I think what we would need to do is possibly make the devices simpler and for us to be able to access the data easier. Apple make it very difficult to access data. Samsung provide us with a software development kit. Fitbit don't want you to know how they access their data, and will give you a minimum amount of information. So we're stuck with these devices which say they can be used as medical devices, but actually I'm not sure.
Okay, interesting. In the interest of time, I know that Dan Clark has made another comment, which I would encourage people to go and have a look at, because he's provided us with a link as well. But in the interest of time, because we are on a bit of a schedule, I think we'll leave it there. But Duncan, thank you very much. And as I said, there's an opportunity for people to follow up with you as well. So, but thank you for joining us today. Much appreciated. And then we'll now move on to the final speaker of the day, which is Simon McMaster. So let me just invite Simon onto the stage. And as I said just before the break, this sounds quite science fiction-y to me. So I'm very excited to hear this. So Simon, over to you.
Thanks very much. Hopefully it's not too science fiction-y. Is everyone able to see that? That's fantastic. So, afternoon, everyone. As you can possibly tell from my accent, I'm not from around here, I'm from New Zealand. But Footfalls and Heartbeats has been a passion of mine for the last nearly 20 years now, actually. And the topic today is going to move you from the 16th century up to the 21st century very rapidly, very quickly, and hopefully with a bit of amusement and stuff along the way. So basically, Footfalls and Heartbeats is a company that knits textile sensors. And by that, I actually mean the textile itself is the sensor. There are no embedded electronics whatsoever. It's an electrically conductive yarn with electronics attached to gather the data, but the sensor itself is actually a piece of knitting, all right? And we're based in Nottingham, and by a completely serendipitous coincidence, basically, I got to come back to Nottingham, move here probably 10 years ago, very close by, and Nottingham is where weft knitting was invented. So weft knitting is the method of knitting which you will see basically within a lot of the textiles that you interact with. T-shirts, that sort of thing are all weft knitted. And the stocking frame, the lovely device you see on the left of the screen, was invented by William Lee. And if he came back today and looked at a modern sock knitting factory, he'd go, it's his device, it's just a little bit quicker and it's a little bit faster. That's all it is. There's no difference to what he invented 400 years ago, basically. Now, when you all think of knitting, I won't say you all think of exactly of this, but most people do think of grandma or granddad sitting on their little bench and stuff, knitting with needles and stuff. So I stuck this in because this is what people think knitting is. It is, and it is actually weft knitting. However, this is not what we do. What we do is actually this. So we use circular or flatbed machines that are incredibly complicated and allows us to knit different structures and different patterns into almost any form of textile. So we've got one of these machines downstairs. We're based in Nottingham. We've got one of these flatbed machines. So it literally means what it says. It's a flatbed machine. It's got a couple of beds on it, and you can see the needles interact on the screen on the right-hand side. Putting those yarns in, you can see how the loops are made. And then here you will see state-of-the-art circular machine. So this machine allows us to knit socks and shoes. Now, we'll show you some of this further on in the presentation, but we believe it's the only one of its kind. I'm not sure that anyone's got any more of these in the UK at the moment, but this allows us to knit shoe uppers, a full shoe, in 12 minutes. And it gets spat off the machine, we steam it, and you're done. It's all finished. So we use technology that is as simple as a pair of knitting needles, but as complicated as requiring a huge amount of programming and a huge amount of design. So it is state of the art. And it's one thing that I'm incredibly proud of with the team here in Nottingham. So we're probably one of only 4 companies in the world that is able to do this at the moment. It really is cutting edge technology, even though it does involve knitting. Okay, and the simple reason we use knitting is this. That tree has been knit bombed. So people have knitted a whole series of things and joined them together. And the reason we use knitting is because it forms over almost any organic structure anywhere in the world. So anything that you can think of that's a really weird shape, I can knit a piece of weft knitting and it'll probably fit over it. Okay, so that's one of the biggest reasons why you do it. But it's also comfortable. It's also easy to use. It's easy to wash. And probably one of the biggest plus points of it is it's a cultural constant. It's used by just about anybody anywhere in the world. It's something that people can use to do the majority of anything that they do. If you go to any culture, there's probably some form of knitting in it. All right. And then finally, one of the other big things is you'll often hear with smart textiles, wearables, whatever you want to call them. I consider what we do the true wearable. I won't have a go at Fitbits or Apple Watches, but Fitbits and Apple Watches, just to disillusion you all, don't measure your footsteps. They measure your arms moving. Okay? So those of you who have done 15,000 steps in the last week, you haven't. Your arms have moved 15,000 times. That's the difference. Okay? So, but with our product and products that we make, it physically measures either the part of the body that you want to measure. So I can measure your foot striking the ground. I can tell you exactly how many footsteps you took. I can measure your arm moving. I can do all of those things. And with one last bit is wearable technology is able to be made in many forms, woven, knitted, different types of knitting. But with knitting, because you use one yarn in a continuous thread in a series of loops, you can actually puncture the sensor in various different places, and it will still work. You could drive a screwdriver through one of ours and it would still work because the signal runs around the hole that's been created. So this is what Footfalls tries to do. This is what we're doing at the moment. And basically the message at the bottom left-hand part of this particular slide, be bold, be brave, have fun and change the world, is the only reason to do this. Okay, most important thing is have fun, the third one. So just a little aside, we moved premises in November last year. First thing we moved was the beer fridge. It's most important, okay? Then all the other things will trundle along as we go, okay? Now we're just going to I'm going to show you a series of videos, which I will talk over a little bit. the videos that we've done of how some of our technology works, not all of it, but how some of it works, and we'll go from there. So basically we have pressure sensing textiles, or something we call push, and you'll see this person come and sit on the seat, which is supposed to represent a car seat, and you'll see the animation light up. As they move, you get different colors. Those different colors represent pressure. Now, the pressure that you see is a relative pressure. It's taken from a baseline. Knitted textiles, or textiles in general, it is incredibly hard to get absolute values out of them. But as a relative pressure or a pressure map, it's brilliant. Okay, so this is what you can see. And this particular textile you cannot feel, you actually can't see in the car seat. It's knitted on the back of that orange fabric, and you actually can't see it. So this is one of the biggest things that we're able to do now. You would think, ooh, pressure, okay, that's great. I can, see somebody sitting in a car seat, but I can actually measure occupancy in a car seat, okay, without a sensor. I can also measure things like for safety. I can measure whether you've placed your child in the back of your car or your groceries. I can tell whether it's an animate or an inanimate object, okay? And then when we move from that, we can move into this one. This is a very old sense of things we've done. You'll see as the person rolls their foot around in the first video, you'll see that the sensors change color. Same thing, relative pressure. There is nothing in that, as you can see from the picture on the far left, there is nothing in that sock apart from those knitted grey squares and what look like gold tracks. They take the power in and data out. That's it. You can throw that in the washing machine, take the electronics off, throw it in the washing machine and wash it. And we've managed to wash our sensors up to 150 times and they still provide the data that we require. Middle one, you can see it actually showed the person putting their shoe on. So it showed the pressure's changing again. So it forms a baseline. And on the right-hand one here, you'll see it as a very simple representation of gait. Okay, so it's the same technology you saw in the first one. That's what you see there. This one here takes exactly the same technology, but instead of using it in the push or pressure mode, it uses it as strain or stretch. So you can see here that we're able to measure the person moving their arm, the range of motion. This is a very early model. We're actually finalizing bits on this particular type of sensor at the moment that's able to measure joint angle. So this is something we're trying to do with a European wide grant at the moment. Same thing for the knee. It's able to do that for you as well. All right. So you can see all of those things that provide that particular movement, and we're trying to get it so that it is able to distinguish between different movements. Now, one of the reasons why I'm really keen to do this talk is because all of these things that you've seen that I've shown you to do,
obviously a bit of a connectivity issue there, so we'll wait for Simon to come back. Apologies, but that's the joys of today's world, I guess. Let's wait for Simon to come back, hopefully. Fascinating stuff so far, obviously, but hopefully he'll be able to reconnect swiftly. Shifter here says it's working on it, so hopefully he'll be back soon. In the meantime, obviously, if there's any questions, please use the question functionality or the chat functionality if you want to get chatting with people in the meantime while we're working to get Simon back. sadly, there isn't too much that we can do in the meantime, so we'll just have to wait for him to return. So yeah, let me, while that is happening, let me explain a little bit about some of the other things that the STC might be able to help you with. So I won't have to do that in the closing after Simon's presentation when we're done. I mean, as I've said several times before, I mean, you know, everybody will be emailed the slides and recording and the contact details. So there's lots of opportunity for you to follow up. And you know, we are also here always to help people as well. So if you've met anybody, or you want an introduction to somebody, or you want to get in touch with any of the speakers and you somehow don't know the details or anything like that, you know, please do get in touch with us and engage with us. And then you know, I would thoroughly advise people to have a look at some of the Be the Business programs that we do together with them. You know, really powerful business growth stuff, like SME advisory boards, like leadership training, like the mentoring, especially. It's, you know, fantastic tools there. So do please make sure that you have a look at that at the STC website and get engaged with that. All of these programs are completely free of charge, by the way, and they're completely free of charge whether you're a member of the STC or not. Actually, so it's a really good opportunity, and you don't have to be an STC member. Obviously, we welcome you becoming an STC member, because obviously the more members we have, the more we can do. But these programs are available to everybody, really. We've had a question come in. Yeah, which is very specific about the tech, which I'm clearly not in a position to answer. I know that we had somebody else from Footfalls as part of the event earlier. I don't know if they're still here or not. But if they are and they want to answer that particular question or get engaged, then please sort of raise your hand and I'll invite you onto the stage. Yeah, there's somebody here called Adam Charles. I don't know if he's in the position to engage with us or not. But Adam, if you are, please sort of raise your hand and I'll invite you onto the stage. And yeah, I don't know what's happened with Simon in the meantime. But hopefully we'll be able to get him back. I mean, everything seems to be working fine here, so I can only assume that it's an issue at his end. But what a shame. So we have a raised hand. Right, I'll hand the mic over to, oh, Duncan has just disappeared again, so never mind then. Right, he's back. Let's invite Duncan back on. So apologies for this, but Duncan?
Yeah, I'm going to answer Dan's question about pulse oximetry. The pulse oximetry measures the saturation of hemoglobin in the blood. Although it can be used for monitoring the progression of COVID, in the early pre-symptomatic stage of COVID, there is no indication of decrease in saturation of the blood. What we were trying to do with our wearable technology is to have a lead up to the time when someone would get symptoms. So there's like 5 to 7 days when you're asymptomatic. Your body knows you've got something's there, but you haven't got a raised temperature, and you haven't got a decrease in saturated O2. So yeah, I mean, I've used pulse oximetry for quite a lot of work looking at progression of COVID, and yeah, and they're very cheap and very effective and very accurate. And of course, the other thing is you can use them for determining interbeat interval as well if you've got them combined with other sensors.
Just in case I'm not the only one here, what is pulse oximetry?
Okay, so pulse oximetry is looking at two wavelength infrared beams and the absorbance of deoxygenated blood versus oxygenated blood. So your arteries have oxygenated blood, okay? That's why there's a different color. and your veins, the deep veins, are, if you were to cut those deep veins, it would come out like blue, whereas if you were to cut your arteries, it comes out reddish, right? Oh, it's not as obvious as that. But if you're looking at the contrast between these two different colors, you've got an index of the ratio of oxygenated to deoxygenated blood, and that's actually percentage oxygenation is what we're looking at with pulse oximetry. So that would be, normally you'd be above 96% oxygenated in the periphery, and if you're a lot less than that, then you've got a bit of a problem.
Okay, thank you very much. Obviously didn't know that, but thanks. Right, we're still working away in the background to try and get Simon back. So yeah, we're chasing him up, and hopefully he'll be able to rejoin. It's kind of typical, because I know that he was part of the event for the whole morning, and everything was fine, and obviously when it's her turn, he drops out. Sadly, these things happen. One of the many reasons why I'm quite keen that we get back to real life events, where we have to sort of think slightly less, I have to say. Just kind of on that, we as the STC are looking at bringing back sort of real life or physical events again. I mean, obviously we need to make sure that we do that in a legal manner. We need to make sure that we do that in a safe manner. So if you know, obviously depending on what happens, because it's a very fluid situation out there, as we all know. But we're hoping that perhaps in September, if everything continues to go in the way that we want it to go, that maybe September we'll start looking at bringing some physical elements back in our events. We're investigating ways that we might be able to do that in a hybrid manner. So that people could log in from home and be part of the event as well, and obviously be physically there, so people kind of have the option to do that. I haven't quite worked out how exactly we're going to do that, but there's various plans afoot, so hopefully we'll get there soon enough, and then we'll see what we can do from there. But obviously we'll keep you posted on that. You know, clearly you know, to our members, you know, keep your eyes on the newsletter, where, you know, we'll clearly keep you up to date on that. And then obviously if you're a member of the forum as well, we'll make sure that we post everything on there to keep you up to date. Obviously if you're a non-member, then you know, please get in touch with us, or check out our events page on the website, and you know, get in touch with us, and we can let you know. But all of our events are listed on the events page, and will indicate you know, whether there's physical or real life options, or virtual options and stuff. I've just got a message saying that they're actually resetting their router, so obviously something's gone wrong properly, and it should be a couple of minutes. So hopefully we, you know, I don't think I should be singing a song or something. I don't think that's going to do any favors for anybody. But I'll try my best to keep you entertained for a couple of minutes, I suppose. I mean, if anybody has any questions about the STC in the meantime, or anything that would like to see, or any feedback, I mean, either use the chat functionality or the questions functionality, please feel free to fire away. We're always very keen to find out, you know, what else we could do for members, and what we can do. But actually, Simon is getting back, I think. So let's see. No, Derek, I will not be singing a song. Thank you. You know, maybe in a pub one day, but you know, now's not the time or the place. I don't think. Right, I think Simon's system is working on getting back. Clearly, it hasn't quite worked, but we'll see if we can invite him to the stage. Right, okay, so he's still going in and out, sadly. But yeah, no, so please use the chat functionality, or even just the feedback, because when we send out the post-event email, we do include a little feedback questionnaire. Please take the time to fill that in, because obviously we would love to get your feedback on what you think of the event. But as I said before, you know, it's really about, you know, you telling us what you would like us to organize. You know, we are here to assist you. So tell us about the stuff that you would like to hear, and tell us about the sort of thing that you want us to do, or that we can look out for you for and assist you with. The Kickstarter scheme where we can provide sort of free apprenticeship places to people. That was very much driven by the membership as well. We had a number of members coming to us saying, hey, this would be a great thing for the STC to do. I would really love it if you guys could look after that for us. And so we instigated that, and then got approved as a gateway. So yeah, please keep telling us, what we can do and how we can help. I just had it's actually quite interesting that we had quite a comment from Simon just now saying, I hate the internet. Yeah, in situations like this, I think we all do, but there we are. I mean, Teresa made a comment on 250 words to introduce our companies. I mean, we could potentially do that at the event here. I'm not entirely sure whether that's what you mean or not. But obviously on the STC website, we do have a members directory. So all members do have a profile there where they explain who they are and what they do. So, if you want to get engaged with any of the STC members, then please, go onto our website and investigate that and see what we can do there. I just got right. So Simon should be back. So let's invite him to the stage, and let's see if that's working now. So apologies for this, but these things happen, I suppose. Simon, it's so good to see you.
I bloody hate the internet.
I sympathise entirely. I was explaining to people as well that it's quite ironic that obviously you've been here all morning, everything's fine, and now it's your turn, and of course it falls over. Because of course it does. That's how.
How far through did people get bored witless with me?
Quite the opposite. I thought it was really fascinating, and you've just gone to. So you showed us all the pressure sensors with the socks and with the arms and with the knees, and then you were just coming to the next bit, which had a slightly wider scope, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, it was just talking about all of the stuff that we were able to do. So, like, if I've showed you all of the sensors and things, I'm not going to put it back up. But if anyone has any questions, it's let's do that, eh? Yeah.
So was that more or less the end of your?
Yeah, just about. There was a bit at the end about how it can be used completely for healthcare and stuff, and how ubiquitous it could become in terms of being able to monitor your health and well-being. So that's where we were trying to get to. Yeah.
But presumably, Colin has raised his hand, and I'll come to Colin in a second. But one of the things that I was kind of wondering about is, because obviously it has a lot of applications for on-person stuff and things, but presumably, it could also be interwoven into to composite materials and all that sort of stuff, and get integrated sensors there.
Yeah, mate. So I was talking to Tim from BW2 Aerospace. So we're just doing a test at the moment. So I've just put it into a composite. So yeah. So it can go into any. It can go. It has an incredibly wide range of applications, which is great, but not so great if you're trying to get your company off the ground, because you have to pick one or pick a couple that are going to work. So all of those things are a bit tricky. But in general, we're trying to get the low-hanging stuff, which is athletic market and stuff, while doing healthcare in the background. Okay. Because we see it being able to change completely. So I think in a couple of years' time, I could make a shoe that would measure the pressure for the onset, as Dan talked about, onset of diabetic foot ulcers, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah. So,
well, I definitely would like to have a conversation with you after the event, because I think there's a number of different members that can engage with you and would be very interested. But I'll hand the mic over to Colin now.
Okay, cool.
Can ask his question.
Hello again, Simon.
Hello, mate. How are you?
Not too bad. Just a quick question, really, about the scope of what your company does. Obviously, putting the textiles aside, do you also do all of the interfacing and software side, or do you work with partners on that element of it?
Well, we have to work with partners, mate. So I have an incredibly smart team. I work on that age-old principle of employing people who are younger, which isn't hard, and much brighter, which definitely isn't hard, than I am. Okay, but yeah, it's one of the things that I didn't really mention. Wearable technology, and in particular wearable textiles, require a huge multidisciplinary team. So I need everyone from knitting all the way to software, firmware, UI, UX, everything, electronics, the whole lot in between. So yes, and as a small company, mate, we can't employ everybody in every area. So we do interact with other people. Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Excellent. That's good to know.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Excellent stuff. Thank you, Colin. So Duncan's asked a question as well. How durable is the fabric? And do you use conductive threads? How does the pressure sensor work?
Yeah. We use conductive threads. Yeah, it's just electrically conductive yarn. It's our IP is around the structures that we knit in. Okay, it's not around the yarns that we use at the moment. It would be about the yarns if there was something particular about them that we could use, because the graphene's been mentioned here and stuff. So with graphene, yeah, there's particular properties of graphene that would be really cool to use. I hate to think how much graphene thread would cost, but some of my yarns are expensive, but I'm pretty sure graphene would be very expensive. But durability wise, just as durable as your own clothing. So like I said, so clothes and textiles do not wear out because you wear them or use them. They wear out because you wash them. Particularly your clothes. Your clothes do not wear out because you wear them. They wear out because you wash them. Washing clothes mechanically is incredibly damaging to the clothes itself. So it's one of the things we have to test. So like I said, I think, and I may have got cut off, we have washed our sensors, particularly the arm sleeves and the knee sleeves, 150 times, they still work. So that's washing, that would be 3 times a week for a year, and your stuff still works.
Excellent. We've had another question as well. I think actually this came in before you dropped out, and I was definitely scratching around looking for things to say. So I thought, oh, let's answer a question. And I was like, okay, never mind. Because the question is, what are you using to make threads conductive? And does the device interface with off-the-shelf devices like Fitbits, or could it?
Okay, so the conductive threads themselves are, so one of them is, I won't go into too much detail because you'll all fall asleep, is a staple fiber yarn that's made of 20% stainless steel and 80% polyester. The other conductive yarn that we use is 100% nylon, and it's coated in 99.9% silver particles. Okay, so they are products that you can buy off the shelf. I will warn you, they are hideously expensive. So the silver one is 400 euros for one kilo. We can get a lot of sensors out of that, or tracks, but you know, it's quite expensive. But in general, the cost of putting the sensor into the textile is not governed by the cost of the yarn. It's governed by the cost of time of manufacture. So it doesn't make very much difference. Can they interface with Fitbit? I don't know. Possibly. We use Bluetooth or Wi-Fi as our method of communication. So if you can communicate if we could communicate with Fitbit that way, then yes, we could do it. If we can't, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, yeah. we touched upon the graphene earlier, so we won't have to cover that.
Yeah.
Teresa Smith made a comment. The knitted face marks are one of the very few that work well with glasses wearers, but even better molds itself due to the knitting around a variety of faces without leaving lots of gaps on the sides. And I think...
Yeah. Well, Teresa, that's very nice of you, darling. Look at my face. If it can fit me, girl, it can fit anyone. Okay, you know, it's just
on the graphene side. I know that we've got Bobby Lawrenson as part of this event, and he's keen to have a chat with you about graphene.
Yeah, I'd be really keen to have a chat as well, because I believe it has massive potential to help us do what we want to do. Okay. So yes, I would absolutely love to have a chat. I'd love to have a chat with any of you guys and stuff. It's been, so from my point of view, apart from the fact that the internet was being run by hamsters at our end, who decided to stop, I I've thought that this morning's been great. It's been really interesting. It's the first time we've been involved with Silverstone Technology Cluster. It's been brilliant. And so hopefully, guys and ladies and stuff, you learned a little bit and things about Footfalls. And if anybody wants to ask anything, as you can tell, I like talking, so just give me a ring. Don't send me an email. My phone number's somewhere at the bottom of the thing. I hate emails. All right, I just hate them. Okay, ring me.
Fantastic, excellent. The connection with Bobby and yourself will make that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
That's not a problem at all. And yeah, you've already mentioned for people to get in touch with you, which is
yeah, of course I can. Yeah.
So we've kind of time-wise, reached a natural conclusion. So obviously, sorry for the hiccup with the
sorry about that. Yeah.
That's the world we live in these days.
It is, mate. Yeah.
We're all used to it. But thank you very much for participating. Really, really appreciate that. As I was desperately scratching around for stuff to say while you're away, I've already kind of mentioned all of my closing remarks and things. So I think we can pretty much leave it there. What we'll do is we'll put everybody back into the social lounge, so there is still the opportunity to network. We'll leave the room open until about 1 o'clock or so, so we can all have a go. Simon, thank you very much for
cheers, thanks, folks. Really nice.
Really appreciate that. So yeah, we'll leave it there. As I said, I've kind of already mentioned everything that I was going to mention, I think. But I hope you enjoyed today's event. And as I said before, please get in touch with us if there's anything else that we can help you with, or anything that we can do for you, or people that we can connect you with. We'd be super happy to do that. So please enjoy the networking for the 25 minutes or so that it is. And hopefully we'll see you again at the next event. Please have a look at our website for upcoming events. There's lots of really good stuff coming up, and would love to see you there. So thank you very much for participating. Enjoy the networking, and we'll hope to see you again soon at another event. Thank you very much.